Good evening, everybody. I call to order this special meeting of the Township Committee of the Township of Morris on Thursday, December 2nd, 2021. The time is now 7:04 p.m. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Mr. Jorfi?
Here.
Mr. Ravitz?
Here.
Mr. Mancuso?
Here.
Mrs. Wilson?
Here.
Mayor Griselle?
Here. Both adequate and electronic notice of this meeting as required by the Open Public Meetings Act has been satisfied and a statement certifying same will be executed. Just for the record, I want to make clear that there are only 4 people here in the meeting room tonight at Town Hall. It's myself, Deputy Mayor Jorfi, Administrator Tim Quinn, and our municipal engineer Jim Slate, who's also running the meeting. Remotely, our committee woman Catherine Wilson, committee man Butter Evans, and committee man Peter Mancuso, as well as our professional planner and our attorney Scott Carlson and our clerk Danielle Lewis. Those are all remote, only 4 people here in the building. Before we get started tonight, I just had an opening statement before we do the Pledge of Allegiance. Like many of you, I am terribly saddened by the school shooting that took place in Michigan earlier this week. 4 kids were killed and a couple more are still in critical condition. Given that it's now been 22 years since the Columbine High School shootings, it is difficult for me to find the proper words to express the anger I feel that this is still happening, and also the disappointment that so many of us feel that nothing has been done to ameliorate it from happening again, and all the emotions that are in between. In addition, yesterday there was another mass shooting, this one taking place in Georgia, where 4 people were killed, including a police officer simply doing his duty while responding to a call of domestic disturbance. Gun violence has become such a regular occurrence in our country that it often does not even qualify as news anymore, which is why many of you may not have even heard about the shooting in Georgia yesterday. This is one reason I am bringing it to everybody's attention tonight. Personally, I am absolutely sickened by the ongoing gun violence pandemic in our country. It is unfortunate that far too many people prefer modestly more liberty over life, which causes all of us to stay mired in an everlasting tragedy. Over the course of 2 years, the 2 years that I have been mayor in this town, we've had far too many moments of silence to open our meetings because of the people being killed by gun violence across our country. So I'm now going to ask that we have one more moment of silence tonight after we say the Pledge of Allegiance to acknowledge the loss of these 4 children in Michigan, the 3 civilians in Georgia, and the police officer doing his duty to protect the community. My heart goes out to all of these families, the Oxford, Michigan community in particular, including school staff, and all the other kids that may forever be traumatized by this incident that never should have happened. And I ask that everyone keep these families in their thoughts and to ask yourself, how might I be able to do something about this horrific trend in our country? With that said, I will now ask that everybody stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and keep those murdered this week in your hearts as we say the words out loud. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Flag
of the United States
America,
The Republic which stands
stands
one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please stay standing. Very good, thank you. So I'd like to make an opening statement before we get the meeting underway about the ordinance that we're going to be discussing tonight. This ordinance was introduced on November 10th, and tonight we are here for its 2nd reading and public hearing. This past Monday, November 29th, the planning board amended the master plan to allow the proposed use for the site. A copy of that master plan amendment was posted on our website prior to the planning board meeting, and there is a link on tonight's agenda for anybody who would like to review it. We added that hot link this afternoon, so if you go online to our website, you can click the highlighted blue text on the updated agenda that's titled "Received for the Record," and the document will come up for your review. Before we begin, I would also like to lay the groundwork for tonight's meeting. My goal is to end tonight's meeting at 10:30 and then continue the process wherever it might be interrupted at our scheduled special meeting next Wednesday, December 8th. The governing body will not be taking a vote tonight, as we have promised our residents, so we can digest all the commentary prior to voting either on December 8th or on December 15th if we happen not to finish on December 8th. The flow of the meeting tonight will be as follows. Professional planner Paul Phillips will provide us with an overview of the site and the ordinance. This will be followed by questions from the Township Committee and any other Township professionals. Then we will open it up for questions for Mr. Phillips from the public, along with any comments people might have. We will also have a representative from the Red Bulls on our Zoom meeting tonight, and they will be making their own public statement after the public questions are complete. If we don't complete the public questions tonight, we will likely ask the Red Bulls to come back, make their public statement at the next meeting. We will then come back to our Township Committee members to see if they have any follow-up questions for Mr. Phillips. And again, if we hit the 10:30 mark at any point in the process, we'll automatically adjourn until December 8th and pick up where we left off. And then at the December 8th special meeting, we will open the floor up again for the public for any new people who have questions to ask, and then allow a second round of questions for people who have previously asked questions. And if we happen to finish all the questioning tonight, we will open it up again for a second round of questioning tonight if we get to that point. The public will also have questions to ask, have the chance to ask questions directly of the Township Committee after questioning of our planner is completed. This will be followed by public deliberations by the Township Committee members at the next meeting prior to taking a vote on the ordinance. Now I have a little bit of background for everybody. As I said tonight, first up will be our municipal planner, Paul Phillips, who will provide us with a detailed testimony about the site and the ordinance. As everyone listens to the testimony, I would like the public to keep in mind a few things. And these are, first, that this site is currently zoned for office and lab use. As of right, office buildings or laboratory buildings can be built, and the entire existing road network can be utilized by those office and lab buildings if they were to be built. Second, those living in the residences on the former Honeywell site should understand that the entire site, including both residential sections and the two commercial lots, are all within a conjoined area of private property. While the residences have a homeowner association, there is also a property owners association that controls the entirety of the property. Thus, the road network internal to the site are private roads under the jurisdiction of the POA, and the POA has the right, with proper approvals, to do things such as create no parking zones, adding speed bumps, and such. Third, everybody should understand that landowners do have rights. In this case, the owners of lots 4 and 5. And although many residents would like to see lots 4 and 5 continue to remain empty, I don't think that's going to happen. While the office market has slowed down for the moment, the landowners could come back with a proposal for other uses for the property. The point here is that residents should consider what other commercial uses might be proposed for those lots. Personally, one thing I fear is the trend of building warehouses all over New Jersey that are close to highways. The warehousing market is extremely lucrative right now. And I'm not trying to scare anybody by saying this, but the point is that there are other things that can be built there. And for sure, something is going to be built at some point in the future. So as we work our way through the proceedings tonight, I ask that residents consider the impacts of the Red Bulls proposal relative, and I repeat the word relative, to what the current property owners have a right to build there and what else might be proposed in the future if this doesn't happen. This is not to mean that there are no impacts. Right? As I've made several statements before, that this is a low impact use of the property. It's not to mean that there are no impacts, but the impacts are low relative to what could be built there. Another point I want to make for the public is that they should note that the proposal is completely self-funded by the Red Bulls and will not require a payment in lieu of taxes, a program known as Pilot, and thus no tax breaks are being given for this project. And my last point before getting underway is to make sure that everybody understands tonight, we are simply discussing the zoning and not the particulars of the project. Things such as traffic flow, where lighting fixtures might be located, the square footage of proposed buildings, et cetera, will be part of the site plan review done by the planning board at the appropriate time. Should this ordinance be approved, then detailed plans will then be developed and an application will be made to the planning board for a hearing sometime next year, where they will review the details of the fully executed plan presented by the Red Bulls. There will be additional public hearings before the planning board at that time, where the public will again be able to question the project and the specific details of what exactly is being proposed. And this is distinctly different than what we are going to be discussing tonight. And I have no doubt that our professional staff will be speaking to this distinction later on this evening as we work our way through the public questions. So I do look forward to hearing from the Red Bulls later tonight or on December 8th if we run out of time. They have a reputation of being good neighbors, giving back to the community, and I am very hopeful that they will be a good partner not only for the municipality as this project moves forward, but they'll also be a very good neighbor for everyone who lives in this area. And with all of that said, I will now turn it over to Mr. Carlson, our attorney, to read the ordinance into the record, please.
Thank you, Mayor. This is ordinance 27-21, an ordinance amending Chapter 95 zoning of the Code of Ordinances of the Township of Morris. This is an ordinance amending the OL-40 Office and Research Laboratory Zone to allow a non-residential overlay district.
Thank you. And we need Mr. Carlson, we need a first and a second before we open it up, or should we just get into Mr. Phillips' testimony?
I think we should probably go, well, Mr. Quinn, I'll yield to you on what normal procedure. I think normally we want a first and a second to introduce and then begin discussion.
Right. Okay. So will somebody move ordinance 27-21, please?
So do that.
Very good. So I think we have Mr. Ravitz introducing and Mr. Mancuso seconding.
Thank you.
What I heard online. And with that, I will turn it right over to Mr. Phillips, correct? Very good. So Mr. Paul Phillips is our municipal planner here in Morris Township. Paul, take it away. And Mr. Carl, let me ask Mr. Carlson, do we need to swear Mr. Phillips in since he's giving testimony?
Need to know, should we? Let's. I'll swear him if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead, please.
Mr. Phillips, if you raise your right hand, please. Do you swear the testimony you're about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And for the public's benefit, would you state and spell your name for the record as well as give your credentials?
It's Paul Phillips, Phillips. I'm a principal in the firm of Phillips Price. I've been practicing planning in New Jersey for approximately 40 years, licensed professional planner, member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. I have appeared as an expert in probably over 250 municipalities in the state. My firm represents and advises roughly 24 municipalities and boards in New Jersey on zoning, planning, redevelopment, and affordable housing. And I've also been accepted as an expert on numerous occasions in the Superior Court of New Jersey.
And Mr. Phillips, just so that the public is clear on this point, you are the professional planner that is consulting on behalf of the Township of Morris in this matter, not on behalf of the Red Bulls or anybody else.
That's correct.
All right.
Mr. Carlson, I just would mention that I plan on doing some testimony as well, if you want to swear me in.
Sure, Mr. Slate,
into the
raise your
microphone?
raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you're about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And your name is stated there, Jim Slate, Slate, and you are the municipal engineer, as I understand. So there's really no need to go through your qualifications as you are already employed by the township.
Okay, thank you.
Very good, thank you. So Mr. Phillips, take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. So as indicated, this is a public hearing regarding ordinance 27-21, which would amend chapter 95 of the Township Code, which is the Township zoning ordinance. Specifically, the ordinance would amend a particular section of what is the existing OL-40-PUD zone district. And that section regulates what's referred to as planned unit development. The OL-40-PUD district, as you indicated, Mayor, it covers the entirety of the roughly 147-acre former Honeywell corporate campus located at the intersection of Park Avenue and Columbia Road. As many of you may recall, and for others who don't recall, this PUD zoning for the tract was created back in 2012. And it was created essentially to enable what had been, again, the Honeywell corporate campus to be redeveloped for a combination of office research use and residential townhouse use, again, across the entirety of the property. And subsequent to that zone change, the residential townhouse portions, there's an east and a west portion at either end of the property. They have been built. However, as you indicated, Mayor, the central portion, which consists of about 81 acres, has remained undeveloped. And it has remained undeveloped, notwithstanding the fact that approvals to utilize those lands for office research use, consistent with the PUD zoning, again, that was put in place in 2012, those approvals have been in place for years, but the property remains undeveloped. What Ordinance 27-21 would do essentially is it would provide an alternative use for those 81 acres. And that would be for, that use would be athletic training facilities. What I'm going to do is just briefly highlight the changes in that PUD section of the zone. And again, all of those changes are within what's referenced as subsection E, which is entitled Plan Unit Development. And the ordinance amendment itself actually includes proposed additions, which are basically underlined text, as well as deletions, which are shown as strike-throughs. So the major changes are as follows. Under the section on permitted principal uses, right now there is what's referred to as an office lab overlay district, and that covers the 81 acres that I described. And essentially that district allows for a variety of offices and research and laboratory uses or any combination of the above. What this proposed ordinance would do is it would change the name of the office lab district to a non-residential overlay district. And what it would do is it would keep the office research laboratory use as a permitted use within the district, but it would also add as an alternative use athletic training facilities use. And in the ordinance, that's defined as facilities intended for professional, academy, and youth sports teams, and which may include, in addition to outdoor fields, buildings used for administrative and business offices, gymnasiums and or field houses, athletic training and fitness, classrooms, dormitories, a single indoor athletic field, food service operations, physical therapy, and ancillary facilities related to athletic training. So that would be added, and within the non-residential overlay, a property owner developer would have the option of either continuing the office use or doing the athletic training facilities use. There would be no combination. It would be an either or. The next change comes in the very next section, which has to do with the maximum development yield. And the maximum yield in terms of square footage for the office research lab option would remain unchanged. And that number is 900,000 square feet. But we are also adding a provision relating to athletic training facilities use, which would cap that total gross floor area for that use at 275,000 square feet, or about 30% of what's allowed for office use. There would also be added a section which would outline accessory uses for the non-residential overlay under the athletic training facilities alternative. And basically the bulk of the ordinance would be a entirely new section, which would add development standards, again, under the non-residential overlay alternative for athletic training facilities use. And those standards would include, and I'll just run through what they cover. They cover maximum height of buildings, maximum impervious coverage, maximum building coverage. Typically, again, these things you find within a zoning ordinance regulating development in any zone. We also have building setbacks to locations that would include Columbia Road, the plan unit development tract boundary other than Columbia Road, and also to the east and west residential overlay district boundaries. There would also be minimum setbacks of any parking area and minimum setbacks for any outdoor fields, which would also go to those same three locations: Columbia Road, PUD tract boundary, and any residential overlay district boundary. We've provided a section with regard to off-street parking requirements, off-street loading. We have a section covering landscaping and buffering. We have a section covering outdoor lighting, fencing, signage, the number of buildings permitted, as well as access to the facility. If there are any specific questions regarding any of these standards, I will, together with Jim Slate, will do our best to address those particular questions. One final point that I want to make before taking any questions of Township Committee members or before we go to public comment, which is that the zoning under consideration this evening is really intended to provide certain threshold standards to really to achieve two things. One is to adequately provide for athletic training facility use on the premises, understanding its shape, its size, and so forth. And just as importantly, to also provide appropriate safeguards relative to adjacent uses and residents. That's basically what the zoning is intended to do. The details, and the mayor addressed this in his opening, the details associated with issues such as traffic levels, parking, lighting, buffering, operations, location of facilities, they would all be addressed at the time a detailed site plan submission is made, and an applicant would have to appear before the planning board. And again, all that is premised on this ordinance being adopted. So with that description, Mayor, I turn it back to you, and myself and Jim will basically stay on board, and to the extent that we can, again, address Township Committee comments or public comments or questions, we are in a position to do so.
Very good, thank you. So I will start with the first question. I think I already found the answer. So as you were walking through the development standards, I saw that I know that the maximum impervious coverage for this site is 35%. I was going to ask what the impervious coverage allowance would be in the former zone, but I flipped back to section 7, which is crossed out now on the page before, and I see the maximum impervious surface there is 55%. So is that, if it was built out as office, is that 55% the accurate number?
That is correct.
So that the site of 147 acres could have 55% of that be impervious coverage.
That is correct.
Okay, so by going from 55% to 35%, if I do math, 10% of 147 is about 15 acres, double that. See, with this new standard, we're getting about 30 additional acres of non-impervious coverage, or right? Pervious
Yeah,
coverage.
and just
Non-impervious
also,
is pervious, yes.
that's correct.
Or
And
natural
just-
cover, yeah.
Just to be clear, Mayor, and this is set forth in the parenthetical after the 35% in the ordinance, to be conservative for purposes of calculating impervious coverage, any artificial turf fields are actually included, and only the natural grass fields would be excluded. So in terms of actual, what you would visually observe as green space, right? You would actually have a greater percentage than what would be the inverse, which would be 65%, as what would appear to you visually in looking at the site relative to office, where, as you stated, buildings, parking structures, or parking lots would basically include a lot more paved surfaces and blacktop.
Very good. And what's the comparison in terms of parking spaces for this site versus what it could be built out as an office building?
Well, I will tell you this, that there have been some preliminary concepts that have been shared with the township by the intended user in terms of parking. And I think those numbers have come in roughly, and Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, about 400 or so spaces, give or take. That it sort of pales in comparison to the office parking, which I think was roughly, Jim, around 3,600 spaces, something of that magnitude.
That's correct. At, 900,000 square feet at, 4 per thousand.
Right.
Parking.
But I will caution you, Mayor, and this is why we set up the ordinance the way we did. Parking for this use, which I characterize as sort of an idiosyncratic use, because it includes different activities over different times of the day, and they are non-coincidental peak hours. And we've basically required any applicant to do a detailed parking study that's tied to the proposed operations of everything. Anticipated employees, teams, visitors, and also accounting for seasonal variations and monthly and daily and weekly variations. And we basically said the planning board will determine what's the adequate parking, and they will consider the anticipated peak demand. So there's going to be a significant burden on the applicant to basically show that it has sufficient parking for the facilities. So I think the ultimate number of spaces is going to be determined based on the operations. But again, to answer your question, just conceptually, the comparison is roughly about 400 spaces to 3,600 spaces.
And so the public understands, if it went to the, if this gets approved and it does go to the planning board, and the planning board for some reason deemed that there was insufficient parking and more parking were needed, the 35% impervious coverage still stands. And that means other things would need to shift in order to accommodate the parking.
That's correct.
Correct.
And all of the setbacks will still stand. Parking setbacks, building setbacks, they will all stand. So, any applicant would have to find a way to accommodate that parking, and it may or may not be at the expense of other contemplated facilities, but that all remains to be seen. As you've indicated, the devil is going to be in the details, and that really comes at the site plan application stage.
Very good. So let me open it up for questions from other committee members. Does anybody want to go first?
I can go first if you want, Mayor.
Sure. Thank you, Committeewoman Wilson.
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions about the ordinance. First of all, just to clarify, and a couple of things here were discussed at the planning board meeting, but I know there are many residents on tonight who are not at the planning board meeting. So I would like to highlight a few things for the benefit of there's 89 attendees on our meeting this evening. So if you look at the second page of the ordinance, general development plan is required, right? So
Correct.
there was a general development plan submitted as part of the original build out of the two residential portions of the tract, correct?
That's correct.
And did that general development plan also include plans for the 85 acres that we're talking about tonight? Or
Yeah, it's roughly 81 acres.
I'm sorry,
Kathy.
81,
That's
yeah.
okay. And it did include basically a general conceptual land use layout that was tailored to that maximum 900,000 square feet of office floor area.
Okay, so a new general development plan is required, and that will just focus on the 81 acres, or it takes into account the entire site?
It will just focus on the 81 acres because there was also general development plan approval for the two residential components. And as a follow-up to that, there was a site plan application for those residential components. And as you're aware, the residential has been essentially built out and is now functioning as such. So there is no need to amend the general development plan vis-a-vis the two residential components. And as you know, there's also an open space component at the other end of the property. So assuming again that this zoning were to be adopted, an applicant would first, before going to site plan, would have to file a amendment to the general development plan consistent with the zoning, which requires it and continues to require it.
And that general development plan would be presented before the planning board, correct?
Correct.
And would include a public hearing.
Correct.
Okay, and that would be voted on prior to any site plan being brought forth?
That is correct.
Okay. I also have a question about, let's see here. It's the principal uses, section 4, section C2B, where it references streets and driveways providing direct or indirect ingress to or egress from public streets for any or all PUD uses. So
Right.
the mayor brought up the distinction between the streets in the development are, I guess, can you just clarify what that is? They're public streets, but they're privately managed. What is the distinction between public and private on the streets that are part of the development there?
So my understanding, and Jim can chime in, is that the internal streets are private. The intent of this section that you cite, that is unchanged from what's in the ordinance now. And the intent was that because of the different uses and because there would be shared use of those driveways internally, we wanted to make sure that we covered ourselves in that, for example, driveways used by the office component would also be used by the residential, right? And we don't make a distinction here between streets and driveways. And as you indicated, they're private, but that we wanted to make sure that that was covered so that those internal drives would have access to the public street system, which they do. And we're just carrying that forward. There's no additional changes.
Okay.
But other questions about the HOA and the POA, I kind of know that somewhat, but Jim, if I have anything wrong or you want to add to it, just jump in.
No, I think you covered that adequately.
Well, I know I've heard some discussion among residents of possibly wanting to suggest various, interventions, if you will, on the streets, like a stop sign or speed humps or, various interventions that might come up. And how would that work? Would that go through the property owners association, or would it be overseen by our police department, or how would any possible suggestions from that residents might have on that be worked out?
So Kathy, I'm not up to speed with all the details of the agreements and the interrelationship between the HOA and the POA, so I'm not going to venture to speculate. And I think a lot of these questions really are something that should be addressed by legal counsel. I've, again, not reviewed these documents, so, I'm kind of not going to go down that particular road in terms of how that would be worked out. But I think your point that these are issues that are pertinent, relevant, and probably on the table at the time of any site plan application before the planning board. But other than that, I'm really not in a position to comment.
Would you have any comment, Mr. Slate?
I mean, in my opinion, those type of changes would be part of the site plan process. If anything on that site, were to change, technically, amended site plan approval is required. So my thought process on that would be that the Red Bulls will be submitting or whoever the applicant's going to be is going to be submitting some sort of site plan, and they would be addressed at that point in time. I think that would be the appropriate time. And, if there were some type of intersection improvements or traffic calming, it would need to be designed by, an engineer. And we would take a look at that and just make sure it's not creating a hazardous condition, but that would be part of the site plan process.
So it would be part of the site plan process, but it would be primarily the responsibility of the Property Owners Association and or the Homeowners Association to make whatever plans there were and implement them, not as opposed to it being a township responsibility?
Well, there are legal documents, as Paul alluded to, and, it would have to follow those procedures that are established as part of the, Property Owners Association.
Okay. Right. Another question I have has to do with permitted accessory uses, section C4. Let me locate that. It says any other use that is subordinate and customarily incidental to the permitted principal use. So my question there is, can you give an example of something that is a possibility that might be incidental to the principal use?
So the reason that's there, Kathy, and we've talked about this at the planning board level in connection with another zone, is that inevitably what happens is when you craft a zoning ordinance, and particularly when you deal with an accessory use section, you can specifically put forth sort of known accessory use, off-street parking, right? You kind of know it's an accessory use. Accessory storage or sheds, you kind of know it's a typical accessory use depending on the use. But inevitably what happens is when you try and just limit it to items that you could think of at the time when you're crafting the ordinance, and this is my 35 to 40 years experience, is that there's always something you don't think of. Mm-hmm. And this is a sort of a catch-all that you will find in the overwhelming majority of ordinances. And ultimately, the planning board will have its discretion to determine whether it believes that whatever may be advanced is considered, in their opinion, customarily subordinate and incidental to the permitted principal use. So that's there basically to provide some flexibility, and also, I think, to give the planning board some ability and protection to determine, what is a customary accessory use.
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned that it's the planning board that makes that determination, because in a sort of what I would call a regular sort of land use application, if a variance is needed, typically that would go to the Board of Adjustment. But in this case, any need for a variance would be the purview of the planning board, correct?
It gets a little tricky because under the MLUL, the distinction in a D variance relates to and I'll get the wording, but it says, because this comes up all the time and there's some disagreement in the land use and legal community, but let me get the exact wording for you out of the MLUL. It's a use or principal structure. So, technically, if the board felt that someone was proposing an accessory use that wasn't permitted and they felt that it didn't meet the subordinate customarily incidental, it could then go to the zoning board.
Okay. That's okay. All right.
And by the way, that's the reason the catch-all is in there, that it gives the planning board discretion if a accessory use is proposed that wasn't thought of, that makes all the sense in the world relative to the permitted principal use, they don't have to worry about it going to the zoning board, because otherwise it would only relate to the uses specifically listed. It's really a protection.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. And I have one last question in a point of clarification. In the exchange you had with Mr. Grazel, you said that the impervious coverage was 55%. It was not clear to me whether that was just the 81 acres or the entire tract, the 147 acres.
It's just the 81 acres. The east and the west residential overlays had a lesser coverage requirement. I think it was, and I can look it up, but I think it was 35%, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in for a second, Kathy, you caught my error, which I was going to correct when you were done. When I made that calculation of the difference between 55 and 35%, I used the full acreage of 147 acres versus the lot acreage. So when I stated it was a 30-acre difference, it's really a 16-acre difference in impervious coverage. So thank you for catching my math.
Okay, thank you. And that is all the questions I have for now. Thank you.
Great. Who would like to go next?
If I'll speak, Peter.
Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Phillips, you did a wonderful explanation. I have 3 or 4 things I'd just like to ask you and some questions to pose. You spoke on your opening statement, which I thought was very succinct and well said, that it's a low impact area, it's self-funded, and there's no tax breaks. Could you make a little bit more elaboration on those 3 points?
That was from my commentary, not from.
That was Jeff.
Oh, okay.
But the applicant has said, the Red Bulls has stated that they're fully funding. They've made a public statement that they're fully funding the project.
Okay. All right. A question again, Mr. Phillips, how long has this area been vacant or lying fallow?
So as you recall, Peter, back in 2012 is when the zoning went into existence. And at that point, Honeywell was in the process of, phasing out operations. And ultimately what happened was a general development plan approval was obtained. I believe it was in 2014. And then in 2015, there was individual approvals for the KHAV residential, as well as for one of the office buildings on lot 5, which is the non-Honeywell lot. And then Honeywell got an approval to basically renovate for office lab use 2 of the 5 buildings, I believe. And those came in 2015. So the way I characterize it is that for the past half a dozen years, notwithstanding the fact that both lots 4 and 5 had approvals for either office or office research use, those approvals obviously have not been perfected, and the property has basically stayed, fallow and unproductive since that time. So I think that gives you a sense of sort of the history over pretty much now almost coming on the last 10 years.
I appreciate that, sir. Thank you. And just one other question. I know we go planning board, township committee, planning board, township committee. Depending on where we go tonight, does this come back to the township committee for any further adjudication on our part?
If this ordinance is adopted at some point by the township committee, any follow-up vis-a-vis the site in terms of a applicant making a site plan, a general development plan or site plan application would only go to the planning board. The only reason it would come back to the township committee, Peter, if there was some necessity to amend the zoning again. Otherwise, it would strictly be the planning board's jurisdiction.
Good. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mancuso. Committeeman Ravitz, do you have any questions?
Yes, really more of a commentary than a question. And I did want to touch on the impervious space, but that was hit kind of first thing. I do want to just kind of clarify for all the residents that are on the line. We've had this property in the township sitting vacant for near 6 years now, or just about 6 years. And as the mayor had stated previously, we know that that's not going to stay vacant, for much longer. It's actually quite surprising that it's been vacant this long. There's nothing, I just want to clarify, there's nothing stopping any developer from coming in and deciding to build. Well, clearly corporate use is acceptable, but to come before the township and ask for additional high density housing, for that area. Is that correct?
You asking me that, Mr.?
I'm asking anybody that can answer the question.
So I'll try and answer it this way. And I think the mayor sort of pointed it out. We all know that the corporate office market is stagnant.
Mhm.
We all know that that's been exacerbated by the pandemic. And we also know that the kind of structure of future office use, may have changed permanently. Is it going to be a hybrid model? Is it, going to be more remote? There may be some combination, but there still remains some uncertainty. And the other thing we have here is basically a site without even a building to convert. And with all the space on the market, existing space on the market, it really puts this site, which is now the approvals would be built to suit, at a severe disadvantage in terms of what's out there in the market and what this has to compete with. So I think we can all be kind of pretty confident that, it could be more years while we're waiting to try and get a corporate office user. So something is going to happen there. Certainly, we all know that the residential market continues to be strong. I wouldn't be surprised somewhere down the road that there would be a proposal to do some type of housing or senior housing or both on that site. Non-residentially, what I would say, and I would concur with the mayor's statement, what I see out in the market is that the warehouse distribution market has been absolutely insatiable. And I will tell you that sites that 5 years ago someone would have told me is an appropriate warehouse site, I would have laughed them out of the room. But there seems to be just so much demand for various levels of warehouse distribution, last mile delivery, the whole gamut. And non-residentially, that's a use that's fairly high impact. And you're dealing with long hours of operation and a lot of truck traffic and so forth. So, I see that as, someone could come forward with that potentially non-residentially. And then, as we said, the other aspect of the market probably is, housing, which is not what this property is designated for. There was always intended to be both a residential component and a non-residential component.
Right, so could someone ask for a redevelopment of that area to make it residential if that was, up for grabs? Is that a possibility is what I
Well,
want to know.
anybody, as you know, can ask for anything and request the township to consider anything, and
Right.
you have the right to do that.
Right.
What I will say on the housing front is that essentially the township has a judgment of compliance with regard to its affordable housing plan through 2025. But, 2025 is coming up relatively close. We're going to be in 2022 in a month. And that could be on the table for the sort of next round of affordable housing. That's not outside the realm of possibility.
One last thing. I'm just looking at the town and the infrastructure of the town. Having this as an athletic field or athletic facility use, what is your sense on the impact of the infrastructure of the town versus alternatives that might come before the township committee or the planning board?
When you say infrastructure, you're talking things like roadway capacity, sewer, those kinds of things?
Yes. Schools, roads, sewer,
and
yes.
Jim, you can jump in on this. And Jim, we've had our traffic engineer look just generically at some order of magnitude numbers. Jim can deal with water and sewer infrastructure issues. But at least preliminarily, from a traffic standpoint, at least during the critical peak hours of the adjoining roadway network, there's significantly less traffic for the use. The trade-off, as you know, is that this use does occur at times, such as on weekends and, potentially some operations at night where the office traffic doesn't exist. But during those peak critical hours when the roadways and intersections are jammed, this will be a much more beneficial use from a traffic standpoint. Jim, I don't know if you want to talk about water sewer infrastructure. That's really your bailiwick.
Yeah, I mean, I would just touch base on that and say that, it would be obviously much less impact to water and sewer, than the 900,000 square feet of office space.
Thank you both for your answers. Mr. Mayor, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Abbots. Last up, Mr. Jurfy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be somewhat brief, having noticed many of my questions have already been asked, but Jim or Paul, should this request have been about residential use, about how many residential units, if it was, to be consistent with townhomes, how many units do you think would be permissible or expected on a property this size?
So I'll give you a range, Mark, and it all depends. And so just to give you a sense, the townhouses basically were at a density of 4 units per acre. Okay, so if you use 4 to the acre, and just doing some quick math, that would be a total of 325 units. I will tell you that for our affordable housing plan, when we did overlay zoning, that overlay zoning, I believe, was 10 units per acre. You do that math, you have 800 units. Developers are proposing housing at even higher densities than that. So just to give you some magnitude, it would be a lot of residential units because you essentially have 80 acres of ground to work with.
Mayor, can I add one thing to that? There has just been approval right across the street of 210 residential units on a 3-acre property. This occurred in Hanover, which is a density of, I believe, 65 units per acre. It's another town, but to give an indication of density possibilities.
Mhm.
Just continuing, thank you, Ms. Wilson. The rest of my questions are, as we discussed already, were site plan that dealt with traffic flow, ingress and egress. So I will reserve for now and yield back my time so the residents can have more time to speak.
Very good. Anybody else have any follow-up questions before we open it up to the public? And seeing none, we will start the public questioning process. We will, if you could raise your hand on Zoom, we will acknowledge you. I ask that you try to keep your questions and comments to 5 minutes. Like I stated earlier, everybody will have a second chance to ask questions. So there will be opportunity for follow-up questions if need be. I see a couple of hands raised already.
So I see first up is Ryan McGee.
Ryan McGee. So we're going to ask everybody to, if necessary, to spell their names if their names are not clear online, to verify their names, but also to give us your home address. So Ryan, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Your name and address for the record, please.
Thanks. Ryan McGee, 142 Lake Road.
Which road?
Lake Road.
Lake Road.
Lake.
Very good.
Thank you, Mayor and committee members, and for the other speakers to follow tonight. I'll start just full disclosure. I am an attorney in town at Riker Danzig. I know the firm has appeared before this committee before, so that's in the spirit of full disclosure. But I'm actually speaking here tonight as both a lifelong New York Red Bulls fan and even a Metro Stars fan dating back to 1996. And more importantly, of course, as a Morris Township resident where I live with my wife and my 2.5-year-old daughter. I think I just want to sort of echo the mayor's sentiment about perspective as to development. We're all lucky to live in one of the most desirable suburban neighborhoods, in my mind, in the state. And we're adjacent to one of the most desirable downtown districts in the state. So it's natural that we are going to attract and continue to attract development projects here in Morris Township. So I've got to admit, when the press release came out, I was very pleasantly surprised that what I was looking at was not some commercial office complex or high density use, but yes, an alternative that would have a lesser impact. But more importantly, that lesser impact facility is a world-class training facility for a professional sports team that's essentially going to be comfortably nestled in our backyards. That's a good thing. That's not a negative thing. Soccer is on a rise in popularity in the state. So aside from the practical reasons behind this that I think have been really well articulated by so many of the members here tonight, I think more so, this is a matter of bringing something to the township that's going to enhance the cultural fabric of our township for the years moving ahead. This is something that I know I want to be a part of. I'm in favor of the ordinance and the zoning amendments that come along with it. And candidly, it's my hope that my friends and my neighbors here are too. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Mayor, point of personal privilege, if I may, I'd just like to thank my former Riker Danzig colleague, Ryan McGee, for showing up and offering his comments during public comment.
Next up, I see a Jacqueline Chapman.
Jackie, can you hear us?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Good.
Yes. Can you state your
I'm
name and address for the
Jacqueline.
record, please?
Yes, I'm Jacqueline Chapman, 14 Nast Road in the township. My question is regarding traffic. I understand, as a matter of fact, there is going on right now, building taking place. I understand there's a hotel that's being built on Park Avenue, just at the intersection where Prescott drops down into Park Avenue. And I assume that that hotel will have traffic, increased traffic. And my question is whether or not the traffic from that has been taken into consideration with the increased traffic from the Red Bulls facility. And what impact do you think the two, the combined, will take?
So thank you very much for your question. Just to clarify your perception, there was a proposal for a hotel on that site. The hotel proposal is now off the board, and the Hanover Planning Board has approved a residential site that Committeewoman Wilson referenced. That's going to have an absurdly high, sorry for my commentary, but an absurdly high density of 210 units on that 3-acre parcel. So there are a lot of extra cars on Park Avenue, which is already a road when we were, pre-COVID, that was already a road that was failing. But with that said, if looking at our site and comparing it to the numbers that were Honeywell level numbers, this is a tremendous reduction in traffic generation from that site compared to what it had been when Honeywell was there. Further, I can just state that the ordinance does have language that states that the access to the site is going to be primarily from Columbia Road. Again, the planning board is going to have jurisdiction over the overall traffic flow for the site, but this is on Columbia Road, and that traffic is on Park Avenue. So I believe Hanover and Florham Park are making their own situation worse for themselves by packing that roadway with traffic. But the egress, entrance and egress from this site will primarily be off Columbia Road. So in terms of taking the other traffic into account, that's a county issue for the level of traffic on Park Avenue. But right now, the level of traffic on Columbia Avenue, and Mr. Slate, you can chime in. I don't think Columbia Road is anywhere near failure right now. It is just Park Avenue.
Yeah, obviously the Park Columbia intersection is in a failure mode during the AM and PM peak. But as part of any future site plan for this property, a full traffic study would be required that would take into consideration the traffic counts on the adjacent roadways. They would have to do a distribution and show how traffic would enter and exit the site. We did have our traffic expert just do a high level look at this type of use compared to the 900,000 square feet of office space. And, just to give you an idea in the on that high level look, we were looking at a couple hundred cars. I mean, the morning peak, they're projecting a total of 118 trips into and out of the site. The evening peak was 256 cars into and out of the site, compared to more than 1,000 cars under the office, and that's both in the morning and evening peak. As Mr. Phillips had alluded, there is potential for traffic that you would not see on weekends, Saturdays, that sort of thing. The traffic engineer did take a look at that as well, and he had a number in the ballpark, 385 trips in and out of the site on a Saturday. As a result of some discussions that came up at the planning board meeting on Monday, I asked him to take a look at that office and lab use. I've talked to some residents as well. There were concerns that, we're now generating traffic on a Saturday where we wouldn't have that with the office use. But he did point out that, an office type lab use does generate some traffic, not, nearly the numbers that you'd see during the AM and PM peak on Monday through Friday. And his ballpark estimate based upon the Institute of Traffic Engineer standards with the lab use, you would see, more than 200 cars, on a Saturday. Obviously, more with this use that's proposed, but nothing along the order of magnitude of, 1,000 or more than 1,000 cars.
Thank
So
you.
I'm not sure how that answers if that answers your question, but again, the detailed traffic studies will occur, as Mr. Slate said, at the planning board level, where they're going to examine all of the traffic on all of the adjacent streets to ensure that the road network can handle it.
Well, thank you for the response. I can't say that I'm happy with it, but thank you for it.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Next up, I see Alfred DeMinero. I may be butchering your last name. I'm sorry.
Alfred DeMiro. Alfred.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes. Your name and address for the record?
Yeah, sure. 2 Aldrich Court in the township. Actually, the front of my home is on Stockton. So while Mr. McGee said this will be a low impact up on Lake Drive, that's hardly a foregone conclusion if you lived on Stockton Road at the corner of Aldrich. I may need the 5 minutes. I was scribbling some notes, so just bear with me. I think the first point I'd like to make is the Red Bulls at their meeting at the hotel said this is low impact and even used the word bucolic. I've heard some members of the committee refer to low impact. I think that's a conclusion that is premature. We haven't had the site plan. You haven't heard from us on the site plan. And to hear you saying that it's low impact is troublesome because that's a conclusion in my view. That's my first point. I attended the meeting with the planning board a couple days ago, and this meeting obviously, and there's a common theme, and that is the concerned residents are going to have a say at the planning board when the site plan approval takes place. What nags at me and worries me is this. It was pointed out early on that the way this ordinance was drafted, and I believe it was drafted by the Red Bulls, no variances will be necessary. So I'm afraid that we're being put behind the 8 ball. For example, the ordinance refers to a 90-foot light tower. If we come in and object to that height, are we going to hear from the planning board, well, it's in the ordinance, no variance is needed, you can't do anything about it? Or a building height, or the fact that the ordinance says that the primary access shall be from Columbia Road onto Stockton, via Stockton. If we want to argue that the Red Bulls are well-heeled and they could afford to make the Honeywell service road the main access, are we going to be told, well, it's in the ordinance that it's going to be from Columbia onto Stockton? That's what troubles me about this ordinance, that I'm afraid that although we've been told we're going to have a lot of say at the planning board, we're going to be put behind the 8 ball. That's all I had to say.
Very good. So regarding with the role of the planning board, they will have control over how the traffic flows. I remind you that as of right, what the developer is able to do to build office buildings, and the setbacks are much smaller than what we are proposing for the soccer fields. There are parts of the zone where literally an office building can be built right on the border with no setback, with very limited setback. You would think it would be no setback, very limited setback. So the setbacks that were being proposed are very generous. And in terms of the traffic flow, again, I would like to just reiterate that the planning board is going to have control over that process. They are going to determine optimal traffic flow, work with the applicant to make sure that the impacts, and I'm sure that they're going to try to do this, make sure the impacts on residences are as limited as possible.
But let me go back to 2 specific points then. Building heights and the tower heights for the lights. If when we get in front of the planning board, somebody says, I think the building height as proposed is inappropriate, it's still too high. If it's allowed by the zoning ordinance, is that the end of the discussion, or can the planning board say, we agree with you, even though the ordinance does permit height X, we're going to require that it just be X minus, or as I said, are we behind the 8 ball? Or do we have no argument?
Mhm. So before I answer that question, I just want to, I forgot to answer one of your other questions about who wrote the ordinance. And just to be clear, our professionals wrote the ordinance. We had the concept plan. We determined what our meets and bounds would be to have an acceptable plan, and our professionals wrote this ordinance. So just so that's part of the record. In terms of the building height, Mr. Phillips?
Yeah,
Can you
I'll
speak to that?
Yeah, I'll try and address some of the issues raised. First of all, again, I'm glad you said it because I was going to say that the ordinance was not drafted by the Red Bulls. In fact, I drafted the ordinance with the assistance of Mr. Slate, and that really needs to be put out there for the record. With regard to the issue of the standards, and let's just use building height for an example, because the gentleman brought that up. So those standards are set forth in terms of height as to at the level of zoning that the height that's listed is acceptable. So for example, we have a 3-story maximum height and 50 feet. And associated with that building height, we put in additional safeguards in terms of setbacks. Which, as I think the mayor mentioned, are not in place today vis-a-vis the office lab overlay alternative. So, for example, the office lab district could have buildings literally on the residential overlay district, and they can be as high as 55 feet. Here, we've limited to 3 stories and 50 feet, which under this particular context, we thought was reasonable. And coupled with the applicant meeting the setback requirements, they go hand in hand. We did provide one exception because we know that there was interest in doing one potential indoor athletic field, which is typically higher. And we set that limit at 65 feet, but we put in an additional protection in the zoning ordinance. We said, okay, you want to go to 65 feet, you have to be at least 400 feet away from a residential overlay district boundary, which is significantly greater than what you could do for a 3-story, 50-foot building. So we were cognizant of the interrelationship and the juxtaposition between what could be built here in terms of building height and where adjacent properties, and particularly the residences in the 2 overlay districts. So that was taken into account when we crafted the zoning. And again, all of those setbacks, height, it's all interrelated. And we spent time and a good deal of thought as to coming up with those particular standards.
So my question is this, sir. Assuming there's a height that's allowed in the zoning ordinance, if somebody from the community said, I would prefer, and this is in front of the planning board, I would prefer that instead of 50 feet, it be 40 feet. And they give coherent reasons for it. Is that something the planning board can consider, or the fact that it's written in the zoning ordinance, can it not be considered?
So I don't want to get ahead of myself and ourselves here, but let me try and answer it this way. We all know that at the planning board, a presentation's made, there's comments made about certain things. Let's use your example, building height. There's interaction and interplay between the board, the public, and the developer. It's all taken into consideration. The board could potentially ask the developer, you know what, that building here is a little bit too high relative to where this location is. Would you consider changing it or doing it 2 stories here? That's all on the, in the cards and on the table during the site plan approval process. On the other hand, a developer could simply come back and say, look, I'm allowed to do 3 stories, 50 feet, and that's what I'm sticking with. And the planning board will ultimately have to consider that, deliberate, and make a decision as to, whether or not they're going to approve that. But I will say that there is significant amount of weight given to meeting the presumptive, height limits in the district. Beyond that, we're all getting into site plan issues and speculating.
I understand. So that brings it to the nub of the problem. And I'd like you to try to address it specifically. You said traffic is addressed at the planning board, but the language in this statute, in this ordinance that says that primary access is from Columbia onto Stockton. If a number of us object to that and say we believe it should be on the Honeywell service for whatever reason, are we at a disadvantage because the ordinance already says primary access should be from Columbia onto Stockton? I want to know if we're disadvantaged at this point.
I can't answer. Well, you'll have to decide whether you believe that if it's adopted the way it's written, you're disadvantaged or not. The way the ordinance was written was basically the intent is that the primary access would be from Columbia via Stockton Drive. That's what the primary access was to the 900,000 square feet of offices. That was taken into account when traffic and intersection signalized improvements were made at the Honeywell main driveway. That doesn't preclude, for example, that there might be some alternative to use the service road as an egress point and so forth. Or it also doesn't preclude the potential alternative that someone convinces someone during the site plan approval process that there's a better means of access. And then ultimately there's the opportunity to seek and grant a variance. It's just that when Jim and I crafted this plan, went back and looked at the prior approvals and the improvements that were made and what we thought made sense for the primary entry for a proposed athletic training facility, taking everything into account, it was our opinion that the primary access should be from Columbia Road via Stockton Drive, consistent with what was always contemplated and what was approved. And Jim, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, and you know what, I think it's a good point for me to share the screen and show, the layout of what was proposed for the, this section here. I'd like to share my screen with everyone if you can bear with me, and I can, speak to that plan.
While you're sharing your screen, I'll make one more comment. I've been sitting on this township committee, this governing body now for 9 years, and 5 of those years I have also sat on the planning board. And I can tell you the planning board is a very thoughtful board. They are looking out for the best interest of residents all the time. And we work to ameliorate conditions whenever they come before us to lessen the impacts on adjacent residents. We understand that people are living next to new developments, and the planning board members are always cognizant of that. They are residents themselves, and I guarantee that they will take that into consideration. And as a planning board member, I would look at what the optimal traffic flow should be, no matter what it says in the ordinance, the language that you're referring to. If it makes more sense to put it on the service road as a planning board member, and I'm not saying I'd be on the planning board next year, but as a planning board member currently, I would always look for an alternative that would be less impactful for our residents. So I just ask you to give them a little bit of leeway, to do their jobs appropriately. But they're not like a rubber stamp or group. They are thoughtful, and they take their time in making appropriate decisions. Okay, with that, I'll turn it back to Mr. Slade, who's going to show you a picture here. Tell us what this is.
This is the plan that shows the overall site. Along the top of the page, I'm running my cursor back and forth along Columbia Road. This is the intersection of Park and Columbia. Park runs on the right-hand side of the sheet. So you can see what I'll call is the easterly portion of the residential development. I'm circling that area. And then the westerly portion of the residential development. The open space is further to the left, or the lower portion of the sheet. And then the railroad tracks, I'm running the cursor off on that left lower hand corner. So the road network that's installed is Prescott Drive, is the main road that comes in across the railroad tracks from Con Road, runs through the site, comes through to Park Avenue. And then there's Stockton Drive that runs through the middle of the site and runs over to Columbia. This is the main intersection. There was a significant amount of roadway improvements that were completed on Columbia main intersection of Stockton and Normandy Heights, and Columbia Road was totally reconstructed. There was widening to provide left turn lanes. That intersection, along with the intersection for the, what we'll say is the Honeywell service road a little bit further to the west on Columbia, that signal was improved. There was significant improvements further to the west to the intersection of Columbia and Normandy. There was some major configurations changed to better handle traffic at that location. There was also improvements that were made to the intersection of Park and Columbia. Those total improvements along that corridor, there were north of $1 million. And again, that was designed to handle the, those improvements were designed to handle the traffic from the entire site. I'm going to now just zoom in on the commercial 81 acres in the center of the site. It's lot 4 and 5. This is the Honeywell lab building that was recently demolished. And then, lot 4, this is the commercial section. So as I zoom in, I'm going to go, Stockton Drive. What was proposed is major access, 3 major access points from the parking lot. Again, estimated to be 3,600 parking spaces for the amount of parking that's necessary for 900,000 square feet of office space. Major access at this location to Stockton Drive, major access at this location for Stockton Drive, and then another major access at this point. In this corner of the site, right underneath where it says sheet E, is a 1-story parking deck in order to help meet that parking demand. There's 4 new office buildings that are shown. I'm outlining one of the buildings at this location, second building at this location. Each one of these buildings could be 55 feet tall. And then another location, I'm just going to move down more to the west. Another parking structure, this gray area here was another 1-story parking structure. And, this office building at this location. Coming on to Prescott Road, there's major access, for the parking lot, another major access a little bit further, I'll say towards the east, and then a third major access on Prescott Road. So the way the site was, originally designed is traffic distribution throughout the site. And under, what we anticipate, I mean, there was a conceptual plan that was, floated out there, but they're talking about, one major access point, out to Stockton Drive to get over to Columbia Road. There was another, smaller lot and access onto Prescott Road in the area of what was previously proposed as a parking deck over at this location. So I don't know how many members of the public, have seen this plan, but this is the original, concept for the 81 commercial acres, and I think it's helpful for people to see that the access points, and this entire area is going to be parking, buildings, and impervious coverage.
And that, Jim, that parking deck at the corner of Stockton and Prescott there, how close, what's the setback? It looks like it's pretty much on the edge.
I mean, this is the roadway, I don't.
So there is a setback there.
Yeah, you know what, across the residential district line is this line that's actually on, I'll say, the eastern side of Stockton Road. From that line there to the deck is about 65 feet. Again, it's a 1-story deck. We're not talking about some major deck, but and the grade does drop off, at that location. But 65 foot is the setback at that location. I mean, just to give an idea, again, this is conceptual. I mean, buildings could be closer to the roadway, but this setback to this 5-story building at this location from the residential commercial property line is about 225 feet. Again, from this location to the proposed, what was proposed as a 55 foot office building. And as I go more in the westerly direction, this other office building, this residential commercial property line to this building, significant grade change increases up here. But again, 55 foot tall building. That's about 125 feet is what was proposed, from that property line.
So if somebody was looking out their back deck on the that portion of the residential property by sheet B, they'd be looking up at that 5-story building.
Yeah, I mean, there's a significant slope that goes up here, so you'd be looking at the slope, but you're going to see a 55-foot tall 4-story office building, on top of that potentially.
Mhm.
Mr. Slade, I have a question. Can you mentioned the road improvements that had taken place over the last few years. Who made those improvements?
So there's the three property owners, the residents, and lots 4 and 5, Honeywell, and I'm not sure exactly, this breakdown on the cost, but those improvements were completed by Hovnanian when the residential improvements were built, but all three, all property owners paid towards those improvements. That's part of
Did the
those
county
documents that
contribute?
the Property Owners Association, it was all spelled out in agreements. I'm
Okay.
sorry, I missed your question.
Did the county, those are county roads, I believe, right? Did the county?
County
make-
roads, and that was all, requirements by the county based upon the traffic counts and the traffic reports, and that was administered. Those improvements were overseen by the county.
Okay, I do note that in the original master plan amendment to this site, there was reference to what was called fair share responsibilities by the various, I don't know what the various owners of tracts of this land. So apparently that is what happened. Correct?
Correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Demir, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still
And
here.
I'm sorry if I mispronounce it. How do you pronounce your last name?
DeMiro.
Demir, okay.
Yeah, look,
Well,
I
just-
still am, I appreciate that. I think it's going to be pretty lively in front of the planning board. And I appreciate the mayor's comments that indicate an openness to really hear our community and the surrounding communities. I mean, I appreciate that. And for now, I'm done. But I am unsettled about what's specifically in the zoning ordinance, because I do think it gives a bit of a hammer to the Red Bulls if things start getting more contentious about which way the traffic flows. But, for now, I've said what I wanted to say. Thank you.
I just want to make one more point before you get off the line as we look at the graphic that Mr. Slade has up on the screen. Where you live in the adjacent residences in that area, you can see, no, Jim, zoom out again. I wanted to show that the Red Bulls property, goes around you on 3 sides. And the Red Bulls actually own the access road the main road that comes off of Columbia Road that's on their property. That's, part of the POA. So I think the POA agreement probably states that everybody has access to that road. And I'm not saying that road is going to change, but they do own the property that road sits on. And I also want to point out that even though there's 81 acres on the site, they're building out it looks like less than half, if I had to estimate. Right, so half of the land that they have is still going to remain open, including all of the land between the homes and Columbia Road, even though they own the land. So, keep that in perspective too, that they have rights, they would have rights at the 55% impervious coverage to do more if this was an office area, but it is being contained now to 35% impervious coverage. And they're not impacting that front lawn. So again, just keep that in mind, that they do own that land, but they're containing the development to that central part of the property.
Thank you.
Do you have anything to add to that, Mr. Slate?
No.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Demiro. And again, I promise you, if you listen into a planning board meeting for other applications, that you'll find that they are a very, very thoughtful group that asks a lot of questions and always has, personally, I think the best interests of the community at heart. Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Next up, I see a Casey Becht.
Casey Becht. Can you hear me, Casey?
Just clicking the unmute button. Yes, can you hear
Yes,
me?
we can hear you. So your name and address for the record, please?
Yes, Casey Becht at 36 Lake Valley Road in the township. So I am a 20+ year resident of Morris Township. I have raised and am raising 3 children in the community. I'm heavily involved with youth soccer within the township and actually within the state, and have had extensive interactions with the Red Bulls relating to numerous activities and how they support youth athletics, both for Morris Township, Morristown, and the surrounding community, but also within the state. And I just kind of want to reiterate, and I'm in supporting of this, and looking forward to the Red Bulls coming into the township. One of the things that I have noticed in my dealings with the Red Bulls, that they are very much about community, about family. And I do envision that they would be a very strong partner for the township, and also for the residents that will be, in close proximity to the facility under question. Specifically, I've seen the Red Bulls and worked with the Red Bulls in where they've provided trainers at no cost to help youth in the community. They've run programs related to assisting with special needs children, called the Top Soccer Program. They've run coaching clinics, again at no cost, to help train individuals on how to interact with children and to develop players. And all in all, I found them as a very credible organization. When they gave their presentation a few weeks ago, they emphasized the idea of community and being in a partnership. And I do fully and wholeheartedly feel that their joining the Morris Township community is going to be a benefit to the township, a long-term benefit. There's going to be a lot more that they add to the community and the opportunities for our youth by having the facility in place. So no question, just a general statement.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Becht.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Next up, James O'Reilly.
James O'Reilly. Mr. O'Reilly?
I'm unmuted, right?
Yes, you are. Your
Yes.
name and address for the record, please.
James O'Reilly, 50 Independence Way. 2 points. I imagine the more revenue you could derive, more tax revenue from a proposed development, is inversely relation to the effects, the beneficial effects of the development on the community. But do you have any estimate of the tax revenue to be derived from the Red Bulls, and also how that compares to any alternatives, or are there no alternatives?
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly, for joining us. Yeah, you're a regular at our regular meetings, and it's nice to see you be a regular at our special meetings as well. In terms of the tax revenue, we are not taking that into account tonight as we deliberate over this zone. We are making our decision based on just the type of application and the merits of it, without taking into consideration what the tax revenues might be compared to something else. I always like to say that I don't make my decisions based on tax revenue. I make my decisions based on what's best for the municipality in terms of fit and quality of what's going in. And we have not made any estimates of what the tax revenue is going to be. Again, as we've stated earlier tonight, we don't know the specifics of what exactly is going to be built on the building, on the site, how extensive it's going to be, what the cost of it's going to be. So until we see more specifics, we won't be able to estimate what the tax revenue might be.
Understandable, but at what stage does that take place?
Post, they go to site plan approval.
Yeah, to post.
Post site plan approval and would submit for the building permits.
Okay, so Mr. Quinn says that post site plan approval, when they submit for building permits. So once Once the site is approved by the planning board and they go for permits and the building department knows exactly what's going to be built, and then our tax assessor can go in and start making an assessment of what the value of those structures would be.
And at that point, they already have final approval to proceed, right?
Yes.
But this is.
Also,
But this is the normal process. We can't assess what the property is going to generate in taxes until we know exactly what's going to be built there. And that's not known until after the planning board gives its final approval.
right.
They have to have their-
Also, I understand that the planning board are reasonable people and are concerned with the welfare of the community. But are they bound by the ordinance?
So anything that goes before the planning board, and Paul can get into the types of variances that can be requested from the planning board versus a variance that has to go, it's such a level that has to go before the Board of Adjustment. But yes, they have the ability to ask the variances of the planning board. Given the detail of what this ordinance states, Paul, I'll turn it back to you. What's the reasonable expectation that any variances would be required? I don't see that, but let us know what you think.
Well, I think it's hard to predict because we basically, and Jim and I have attempted to come up with standards that seem to make the most amount of sense given the use, as well as, again, as I've stated, to afford protection to adjacent areas and particularly the residential areas. And we did have a concept to deal with, but again, it's only a concept. But when you draft zoning, you have to provide some foundation and framework for a applicant and a planning board and the general public to go forward during the site application process. And I think that this ordinance achieves that by basically establishing what are reasonable thresholds in basically balancing all of those particular equities. Whether or not a applicant is going to seek a variance for one or more of these standards, I think that really remains to be seen. And that's always the case in terms of any site plan application. You really don't know, whether or not you can meet all of those standards or whether or not an applicant thinks he has reasonable arguments to apply for a variance. And then a board has to weigh all these decisions on the merits during their hearing process. So again, the purpose of the zoning is to establish those reasonable thresholds necessary to achieve that balance and allow the process to move forward to site plan.
And I'll add to that, Mr. O'Reilly, the two members of the governing body, so 2 out of the 5 people sitting on the days this year right now, but although the construction of the governing body is going to change slightly next year, 2 members of the governing body do sit on the planning board. And so they take with them, the knowledge and learnings from this deliberation to the planning board and the intent of what the township would like to see. Again, there are only 2 members out of 7 that get to vote at the planning board, so they can be overridden. But they do bring this perspective of what the proceedings are happening tonight. They will bring those to the planning board when the time comes.
I understand everybody's reasonable and the people who do the planning have tried to do the best they can for the township. But the planning board itself, it cannot change the ordinance, right?
No, the planning board cannot change the ordinance. They can only grant variances to the ordinance, and only slight ones at that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
See next up, Bob McEwen.
Bob McEwen. Mr. McEwen, you can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Your name and address, please.
Yeah, Bob McEwen, MCEWAN, 18 Van Buren Road. I'm the owner of 99 Columbia Road, which abuts this project. And I'm looking for a little assistance from the municipality. We've had some problems with trees with the Board of Ed. and we've had tree people look at the Honeywell side. I have no way to contact anyone with Honeywell. And I was hoping to get a little help from the municipality just to address the dead trees that could have a very adverse effect on my property. I want to be a good neighbor, but we've had damage from the Board of Ed side. So I was hoping maybe Red Bull in the negotiation with Honeywell could at least have somebody address this and look at it with me.
So Bob, I would say that's like more of obviously a property maintenance issue. And I'd say that's something that, I can follow up on, or we, have someone that specifically deals with the property maintenance issues. And maybe that's something that, we can meet and also get some contacts at Honeywell. They're still the property owner if there's dead trees that are a threat, and the school district as well.
Well, I appreciate it. And I just want to say for the record that I fully support the application. And if there's anything I can do to work with Red Bull to help them, I'd be willing to do it as a next door neighbor.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. McKeon.
Thank you.
Next up, I see Jeremy Newer.
Mr. Newer?
Good evening. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. We can hear you. Your name and address for the record?
Sure. Jeremy Neuer, 302 Whippany Road in Hanover. I'm the former owner of 117 Park Avenue in Morristown, which is actually in the township. And I just, in a world where, office buildings are getting knocked down and industrial buildings are going up, I'm not sure how, if people follow what's going on in our state, but we're becoming very dependent on warehouses. I just couldn't applaud this project more. The Red Bull have been a great member of the Hanover community. I trust that they would be a great member of this neighborhood. And I, again, I live in the neighborhood, and to me, I just couldn't applaud this project more, because I think that from an environmental perspective, the fact that we're not having trucks and we're not building warehouses, the fact that you're limiting the cars, I think that this is going to be not only a great project for us now, but in many years into the future. So I just wanted to come on very quickly and applaud this project in every way. And thank you for considering it. Thank you for adding it to the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you for joining us tonight. Just so the public understands, the current Red Bulls training facility is located in Hanover. They have outgrown the use of the present facility, which is why they've been searching for a new facility and moving to Morris Township, but they are currently located in Hanover.
Next up, I see a Vincent O'Connor.
Mr. O'Connor.
You hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now, sir. Your name and address, please.
Vincent O'Connor, 3 Aldrich Court, Morristown.
Good evening, Morris Township.
Good evening. That's correct. I really don't have a question. I got an observation. It appears that over the last 2 meetings, the one that I attended with the planning board and then also tonight, that whenever a resident of Columbia Park asks a question, he rarely or she rarely gets an answer. What they get is a long dissertation on what could have been if a office park was to be built on the site. But an office building is not being built on the site. The application is simply for the development of a athletic training facility. And I think we are entitled to answers to the specific questions as this process goes forward, because 75% of the time we're given a long talk on what the office complex could have been. And there's never really a comparison being asked. There are not 2 plans on the table here for consideration. So I would just simply ask that whoever it is that takes on the question answers it specifically and not with a comparison. So other than that, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to just speak to the issues here.
Thank you for joining us. And I'll answer you by saying that, again, the details of the project will be vetted at the planning board, where there will be lots of answers needed for questions regarding the specifics of the development. But tonight we're just talking about the metes and bounds of the property itself based on a concept plan. But like I said in my introduction, while we do reference an office park as what's as of right, what the municipality and its governing body tries to do, as I stated previously, is try to find things that work well for our community. What's a good fit, what's good quality development, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Next up, I see Kanan Shahiran.
Kanan?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, can you name and address for the record, please?
Yeah, I am Kannan Sridharan, 16 Gates Road, Morristown, Morris Township.
Very good. Can I ask you to spell your last name for the record, please?
Sridharan.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. First off, I apologize. I could not join in time. So if my question has already been covered, just say so. I'll catch up. I apologize in advance. Question is, in a couple of weeks ago, I think there was a meeting presentation by the Red Bulls folks, and in response to one of the requests by one of the residents, actually two of the residents, we were told that they would create a digital view of what the facility would look like, or what the views would be from several locations. I presume, something that you would navigate through with a mouse or something like that. Will that be available before the next meeting, or before when the site approval or the planning board thing occurs?
So I was not part of the Red Bulls presentation, but as I stated previously, we just have a concept before us tonight. We don't have the details. So I'll ask Mr. Slate to chime in a minute. But I would imagine what they refer to is they would provide those, as they would to the planning board. They would provide those perspective views when the specifics of the plan are actually detailed, which we don't have at the moment. And that's something that I'm sure that the planning board is going to want to see as well, to see the viewscapes from the residents' perspective. Mr. Slate, anything to add?
It would be at site plan, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Quinn confirms that would be at site plan.
That is part of the site plan application.
So to be clear, I would assume then what that answer means is that we would have an opportunity to look at that before the planning board meeting.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, the public will absolutely have a chance to review all of the plans and ask detailed questions. So just to step back for a second, if for those of you who've never attended a planning board session, there are numerous experts that come to testify. There is a specific traffic engineer. There's an architect that comes. There's often a landscape engineer, and for this project, there would be a landscape engineer. There would be mechanical engineers that might come, structural engineers, all different types of experts. And the public has the opportunity to question each and every one of those experts, and their materials are made available ahead of the meeting. So as part of the application process, they need to make those materials available to the public prior to the application being heard.
Okay, two other short questions, please. One is, someone in the HOA here had collected all our feedbacks and questions. I assume that those have been provided to you. Is the plan to respond to them on a point-by-point basis? Will we be able to see the document?
Mr. Quinn, have you seen the document?
Yes, I did. It came in. Also went to the Red Bulls. A list of their questions that came in from the HOA. So it's looked at by our professionals. We can provide a response to it.
So is there a response going out to the HOA?
I'll just discuss that with our professionals, but that's usually the case when we get some type of correspondence.
Okay, so we have received that correspondence. Let me say that next week, at next week's meeting, we'll let you know what the process is going to be with responding to those questions.
But can I take it that that would be available before the planning board meeting, the Q&A?
Before the planning board meeting, absolutely.
Mayor, most of the questions that were there are all site plan.
Do you want to speak in?
These are 99% are all site plan. So until we have a actual plan that is submitted to get detailed answers, but it would be primarily for site plan. Most of the questions deal with.
Right. And one last question. I heard when I came in, Mr. Slate, I think, saying something about a 55-foot high building. Was that in the plan for what was originally authorized, or is that part of the plan for the Red Bulls thing?
No, that was part of the original office layout.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's why I kind of came in late. And so thank you very much for the opportunity. It looks like a good project. Very glad that the board is working with us to ensure the best we can do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
We have no other hands raised at the time, Mayor.
I see
Patricia Collins.
Patricia Collins.
Yes, hi. Patricia Collins, 4 Green Knolls Road, Morris Township. I just wanted to add to what Mr. DeMiro said. I agree with him 100% because if something is a done deal, from our neighborhood, by the way, which is Green Knolls and Featherly, one of my neighbors mentioned at the meeting last week or the week before that we have a trust issue. And I'd like to just say, yeah, more of a distrust issue. Because our little beautiful neighborhood was totally impacted by a CubeSmart put up on a residential lot that was, they pawned it off as an OL 40. And the owner promised to put trees in, like no trucks, change the sign, and nothing got done. And I mean nothing. So my question is, who's going to oversee this? In other words, if the Red Bulls promise something like to include heavy buffering or something, who's going to oversee this and who will enforce it? Because nothing was done for our neighborhood. And we're very angry about it.
Would you like to address that, Mr. Slate?
Yeah, so a site plan obviously was submitted to the Board of Adjustment, and there was input that was received from the neighbors. I would disagree with you. There is planting that was installed as a buffer. That property was zoned OL 40. It was not a residential zone.
Can I ask you a question then, sir? How can a 3-point-something acre lot be an OL 40? It was once an OL 40 when it was attached to Honeywell, but it got detached because there was a house on it. So how could that be that? But it got put in so fast. And when people from my neighborhood went to the meeting, they weren't allowed to talk because they said it's not time. And there were many meetings on it. So my point is, we're just upset because we're just afraid that we are going to encounter the same thing. And if Mr. Slate, if you would be good enough also to just put up that sheet that you had with that you showed before, and I'll show you our neighborhood, that I'm afraid something else is going to happen, if I may have the floor.
Sure, I'll put that.
Would you please? Thank you very much. Right, if you'd be good enough to like zoom over to the Green Knolls, right where it is, right, and zoom over there. Now you see the cul-de-sac there, and everyone else can see it, the cul-de-sac. Now, the Red Bulls property, it looks like it's coming, almost sitting in our cul-de-sac. And this is what we need to insist on, that nothing can be built there, that it has to be all trees, because the people living off the cul-de-sac, they're going to, the Red Bulls will practically be in their living rooms. So we really need to, number one, have that resolved. And again, getting back to what Mr. DeMiro said, if we present it, if it's already in the zoning, they're going to build something, or it's already in the plan, how do we fight it? So would be someone would answer that question, please?
So I'm going to
So I
say
can,
that, oh, go ahead, Paul.
I'm sorry, Jim, that I could just add that there are setbacks established in the zoning to a plan unit development tract boundary, which would be the boundary that borders basically the property off the cul-de-sac. So just for example, there would be no ability to put any building within 175 feet of that boundary. And there would also be no ability to have a parking setback within 100 feet of that boundary, or any fields within 100 feet of that boundary. So basically, you would have 100 feet of what it would amount to a buffer area to afford you, I think, the protections that you are seeking.
Thank you. And to add to, just to expand on that, so could we insist that we want to keep all the trees there, because a buffer area could just be grass? So we'd like to keep that just so the homes are not looking out into a parking lot or something.
So the way we've structured the ordinance, we have a section on landscaping and buffering. And we have acknowledged that where it is appropriate to keep healthy, mature landscaping, which exists on the site, then that is something that basically we're encouraging in this zoning ordinance, and that may or may not need to be supplemented with new plantings. And in instances where there isn't mature vegetation, then the notion and idea is that there would be entirely new landscape plantings and a plan to basically, again, afford that buffering and screening from the proposed activity on site. So again, those safeguards are all those safeguards are in the ordinance, and they're really designed to protect adjacent residences such as yourself.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So next up, I see it's just one name in there, Fantilek.
Yeah, this is Frank Antelek on 3 Featherly Road. I had a question. As I understand it, on the Red Bulls plan, there was a bleachers set for 500 seats. I was wondering, have you given any consideration as to what type of people would be attracted to a soccer? You know, sometimes soccer fans can be quite fanatical. And I was wondering, will alcohol be allowed?
Thank you, sir. So again, the specific details of the number of seats that will ultimately be allowed is going to be at the planning board hearing.
Right.
There is provision, as you know, for bleachers. I can tell you from my experience, that soccer at this level that you're going to see here is not like the rec soccer that most of us are experienced with. This is a professional soccer organization, and I'm sure that the Red Bulls are going to address this. But the type of people that would come to view a match are a different type of fan that goes to a stadium, for example. So these are people that are coming to the facility because it's a professional academy. Again, I don't want to overstep what I'm saying. I'm going to let the Red Bulls address that. But Mr. Phillips, why don't you weigh in on the question here?
Well, again, I would just echo your comments, Mayor, that there's no provision for number of seats. As an accessory use, we put in a provision to allow what we're calling spectator seating, and it could be covered or uncovered. And in terms of the magnitude of that seating and where it's located, again, that is going to be subject to a detailed site plan application. The zoning ordinance is designed, again, just to provide the framework as to what makes sense and where in the context of the overall use. And again, the details will come out during that later phase.
In terms of the alcohol, the answer is no. They will not have an alcohol permit to serve alcohol on the premises. And in terms of noise generation, I just want to let the public know that we do have a noise ordinance, and anything that emanates from the site obviously would not be allowed to exceed that noise ordinance, or there are penalties for doing so. So there are decibel levels of noise that are allowed to come from any site within Morris Township that can't be exceeded.
Is that true during daytime hours also?
That is correct. True 24 hours a day.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Next up, I see Lee Goldberg.
Mr. Goldberg?
Hi, good evening. Lee Goldberg, 10 Arrowhead Road.
Good evening.
Good evening. I was a little late to joining the meeting, but I appreciate the opportunity to have this information presented to us tonight and to be able just to ask a general question at the concept level, sort of, which I know is where things are currently residing. There are two walking trails, one that goes up along the service road, and then there's one that cuts across from Prescott back to the walking trail back on the westerly side of the units. Has there been any mention as to whether or not we would lose access to those, or that would be sort of, you know, parceled off as sort of Red Bull's property and access would be lost, or is that again a site plan issue up for discussion down the road?
It's my recollection that that was part of the original approval, and that would be in the documents to remain. So that trail that runs around the perimeter of the site would be remain. That's my understanding.
And I think that other trail that you referenced that's along the sideline against the residential property, I think that's out, that's right on the border. And I would imagine that would remain maybe outside the fence line. But I think that access would likely remain. I can't imagine that our planning board would allow our residents to lose that access. But again, that probably would come out at site plan for that specific section of trail.
Okay, thank you very much. And then I know Mr. Grazel and Ms. Wilson actually sit on the planning board. And maybe, you know, as this moves forward, would a planning board take into account things like the designation of the Normandy Park Historic District? I mean, does that factor into this any to be future application as to the light pollution or any impacts to that historic district? I mean, I've seen signage on it, but I'm just not sure what weight or that designation may have in factoring to any future decisions on a future application.
I would say that this property is outside of that historic district, so that would not come into play on the site plan.
And I would say that's evidenced by the fact that the old Bossity Center, which actually was a historic structure on the Honeywell property, a part of the old Con Mansion, was allowed to be torn down during the original construction. So I think that's the determinant that would tell you that this is not within the historic district.
But that was a newer building, though. That wasn't something that was, you know, old part of the old site. I mean, that was a new office building.
I think it was newer. Yeah, I think that some of the original structure of the mansion was there, but yeah, it was a modern conference center.
Right. There's no historic.
And then the only suggestion or comment I would have is for the planning board as this proceeds forward is I think it would be beneficial for them to maybe take a field trip over to Central Park and up at the old former Greystone site, where I believe there's a number of nighttime lit fields. I'm not sure if there's 6 or 7 or how many are up there, but I think that would maybe give the planning board a sense of just how much light will be thrown off by nighttime use and the impact that might have on the surrounding neighboring properties. So that's just a suggestion for, you know, your own education and anyone from the public that might want to go up and see what that type of implementation looks like in the evening.
Can I ask Mr. Goldberg one question on that?
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Goldberg, do you know offhand if that lighting on the Greystone Fields is the LED lighting?
I was just about to address that. The lighting at the old Greystone field, at the current Greystone fields, I think those fields are about 10 years old. And so the lighting technology is 10-year-old lighting technology. It is not the technology that's going to be used on these fields. The technology has been tremendously upgraded in order to enable to direct the lighting to where it's supposed to go. And I don't think it's LED lighting up at Greystone.
No.
Yeah.
They're one of the parts that they're going to present is this must-go lighting.
Oh, yeah. So that is part, again. So as I mentioned, all of the other experts that appear at the planning board, there will be a lighting expert that actually does appear at the planning board, an expert just on the lighting and the throw of the lighting and how much the residents will be able to see. But to also add to Mr. Goldberg's comment about Greystone, and my son plays soccer at Greystone and goes to practice. I can tell you when kids are practicing on 4 fields and each field is utilized by 3 teams and you sit, in your car in the parking lot with the windows open in the summer, you can hardly hear anything, even with all 4 fields fully utilized. It's not the raucous sounds of a game. It's just practices, which is what's going to occur on this site predominantly.
Mayor, this is Mr. Ravitz. Isn't there a zoning ordinance about lighting in the town? Specifically, I think we had this issue with Cornine Field back in the day.
We used the must-go lighting there. That's designated just to shine onto the field and have very little.
Yeah, I don't think that there's a specific lighting ordinance that we have. It's site specific based on what's needed at the site.
But we use special lighting up at Cornine Fields.
Yeah, so Cornine Field does have special lighting too, and this isn't even upgrade. What'll be used here is top of the line latest technology lighting. I have no doubt.
Mayor, can I add one comment to this lighting thing? I believe it was at our planning board meeting on Monday that reference was made to locations. I believe they were schools that do have the type of lighting that's being proposed. And I support the notion of visiting and seeing it for yourself. I think that's very helpful. I just wasn't sure if Greystone had this particular type of lighting.
Okay. One last thing, Mr. Goldberg, since you said you missed the beginning part of the meeting and the resident earlier from 16 Gates, I believe it was, said you missed the beginning of the meeting. We are recording tonight's meeting. It will be available on the Township website. We are hoping by Monday, sometime during the day, so in advance of Wednesday's meeting. So in case anybody wants to review what happened tonight or residents missed tonight's meeting, they will be able to view the entirety of the meeting prior to Wednesday.
And I just have one, thank you very much for pointing me in the direction and the public in the direction of the fact that the meeting's being recorded will be available next week. That'll be helpful. One quick engineering question for Mr. Slate on this tract. The Stockton Road is from, I don't know exactly, but from just a layman's perspective, it seems like it's maybe 20% wider, 15% wider than Prescott and some of the that arterial road that runs through. Would you happen to know why Stockton was designed to be wider than the other roads in the community?
Mr. Slate?
My recollection was that Stockton is 24 foot wide, and I believe that Prescott is 20 or 22 foot wide. And that was just part of the design. It did meet the standards, and that was an existing road through the site that was reconstructed.
Thank you very much.
Prescott.
And then
Prescott.
Yeah, and then my last comment is I believe we had the owner of 99 Columbia Road on this call earlier seeking some sort of relief or help with trees, etc. And walking the trails there, they seem to be pumping water off of their tract onto what will be the Red Bulls property at some point, what is currently the Honeywell property. So I would just suggest that maybe someone go out there and take a look at the 6-inch wide corrugated tubing piping that's actually moving water off of the 99 Columbia Road property and onto what will be potentially the Red Bulls property. So in terms of being good neighbors and stewards of what's happening up there, I would suggest perhaps addressing that as well as we go forward. That's the end of my comments, and thank you for the time.
Thank you.
I'm very familiar with that. I mean, there is a drain on the property that property was drained to. There was a problem with standing water at that location and a high groundwater condition. And, in order to help alleviate that, there's some pumping that goes on, but that always drained in that direction. Next up, I see Ann DeSalvo.
Yes, Ann DeSalvo for Delano Court.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for taking the time. So I lived in a neighboring town for 26 years, and I have seen much development along Park Avenue, Columbia Road, Turnpike, some of it very positive. And I'm just curious, like the concern level that the planning board and Morris Township has with all the increased traffic. And with that, I know you keep talking about a traffic study, but who's doing this traffic study? Is that the township, or is that the Red Bulls? I'm not sure who does that exactly. I may have missed that. It may have been discussed and I missed it, so I apologize for that.
So the Red Bulls would be hiring their own traffic expert, and then the township has their own expert that would review that, information.
Okay, so the Red Bulls want to build and come in, and so they're doing a traffic study. Do you think that's a conflict of interest there?
That's the purpose of this.
No, I mean, we hire our own expert to check their work and just make sure it's accurate. There's standards that are followed. The county would also be looking at that, and they have their own traffic experts, since this, a majority of this traffic is going to be going out onto Columbia and Park Avenue. So there's, it's typical that the developer or builder, whoever that happens to be, hire their own traffic expert, and then the planning board hires their own traffic experts to, check their work.
And then is that something that like residents can see that and get access to that report? Is that?
Most certainly. That's all those reports and mapping. It's all public records, and it's accessible. And at some point, once it gets deemed complete, it's posted online. But once that is submitted, you can come in and look at it. But usually there's some back and forth to make sure that all that information is accurate before it's deemed complete and can be scheduled for a meeting before the planning board. And then at that point, we post it well in advance of the meeting.
And at the plan, when it does hit the planning board, there is a formal presentation by the expert to the planning board of all of the numbers in the report.
So who?
That will be a public meeting.
And the expert is the traffic study team that the Red Bulls hired?
It's both experts who are there. So the Red Bulls expert gives the testimony because they're the applicant, and the applicant gives testimony. And then our professionals question the testimony of the applicant's professionals, and then the public questions the applicant's professionals or our professionals. The public can question anybody in the process. But there is
Mayor, if I may, I think I can help with this a little bit. Generally speaking, what a applicant before the planning board or someone that's seeking a zone change in front of the township committee, as here, will do is commission a traffic expert to put together a study as to traffic impacts regarding the proposal. And then what routinely happens is that the planning board, or as here, the township committee, will hire its own expert to conduct a peer review of that report and to opine to the committee as to whether or not, in their independent professional opinion, it's accurate, inaccurate, or what questions need to be asked.
Okay, great. That's very helpful. Thank you. I appreciate the answer.
Very welcome.
Thank you.
This is DeSalvo. I'll add that these kind of deliberations before planning boards happen on a case-by-case basis.
Right.
So when you talk about traffic loads on the road, Unfortunately, the way things work here in New Jersey is that it's always on a project by project basis. And we have this governing body has spoken on many occasions about the need for some regional planning from our county commissioners. And I urge the public to reach out to their county commissioners to ask them to do some regional planning. But we have a problem on Park Avenue where 3 towns meet at one point. Hanover is developing, Florham Park is developing, and we have a project developing on our side of the road. And everybody's acting individually with no coordination, which is unfortunate. And the county commissioners could step in and help us with some regional planning. So I urge everybody to reach out to county commissioners and ask them to do so.
Great. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Next up, I see a Simon H.
Hi, so that's Simon Huang, HWANG, at 19 Green Knolls Road.
Good evening.
Good evening. So Mr. Phillips had mentioned there was a past comment from another neighbor, and Mr. Phillips mentioned that there are some safeguards that's being put in place in this ordinance, right? And I know Mr. Slade, Mr. Phillips are working hard to make sure that there's proper setbacks and everything else. But I just want to make some clarification on that, because since we brought up CubeSmart and 99 Columbia property in the past, there were safeguards in place for that particular zone as well, the OL 40. But I think the applicant can just apply for, use variances or D variances, C variances at the Board of Adjustment level anyway. So even though there are safeguards in place, you can still bypass those safeguards at the Board of Adjustment level. Is that correct?
That is correct, but that is at the Board of Adjustment level. I'll let Mr. Phillips weigh in a second. This is going before the Planning Board and not the Board of Adjustment. So Mr. Phillips, why don't you explain the difference between the two boards and what kind of variances go between the two?
Yeah, so CubeSmart went before the zoning board because self-storage use was not a permitted use in the OL 40. And they have a right to do that under the enabling statute, which is the municipal land use law. And they have to basically advance certain proof requirements to try and convince a board that they're entitled to a D variance. I mean, obviously they did that, and obviously, rightly or wrongly, in anyone's opinion, the board granted that relief. They got an approval, there were conditions. The project was built, and with regard to use variances, each individual case stands or falls on the merits. Here, I think it's pretty safe to assume that when you're dealing with 81 acres and we're putting a zoning in place and assuming it gets adopted, that any variance relief that may possibly be sought in connection with the site plan approval would be related to the bulk or the development standards. They wouldn't rise to the level of what you characterize as a D or use variance. So I'd be hard pressed to believe that the application for athletic training, as we envision it here, would really have any opportunity to be going before the zoning board, which is why we're seeking to put this zoning in place, so that it would, at least in our opinion, go before the proper board, which is the planning board.
Okay. Mayor, if I can latch on to that for a moment and to further answer the resident's question. The applicant could tomorrow file for a use variance in front of the zoning board for what it is that they're proposing, I suppose. An applicant can always file for a use variance and try to meet that stringent burden of proof that's required to get a use variance. But, as we say in the land use community, proper planning is done via ordinance and not by variance. And, at least on the surface, I think what we'd like to all think here is that this is being gone about the correct way, in that the governing body is now being given the opportunity to weigh the pros and cons of the current zoning versus the proposed zoning and come to a decision on that they can then hand off to the planning board as opposed to the zoning board, where the planning board will review it primarily for conformance with the zone requirements, as opposed to a zoning board granting a use variance for something that's completely not, not contemplated in the zone district.
Thanks for that clarification. Just one more comment on that though. So if we go to the site plan, everything gets approved, and let's just assume Red Bulls does build a facility there. After a certain period of time, they want to add another building or something else. During that time, they could still apply for a C or D variance, right? At the Board of Adjustment level?
Well, so they could, let me try to answer it this way. They could still come in before the planning board if they wanted to amend an approval because they wanted to change the site plan or add a building or so forth. If they did that, they still would be subject to the underlying zoning, again, assuming the township committee adopts that particular zoning. With regard to the zoning board, the only reason they would go to the zoning board if this ordinance is adopted is if they were contemplating a use which is not included in this zoning. And, again, I can't see that happening, but, anything is possible. But again, and to basically echo Mr. Carlson's comment, this is the reason that we're trying to do this by zoning and keep it within the planning board, because it's better to do basically planning that, doesn't have to be via exception, which means going to the zoning board.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Who's next?
Back to Mr. O'Reilly.
So we've gone through, first round of everyone, and I see Mr. O'Reilly has his hand.
Okay, so it appears that everybody who wanted to ask a first round question has. So we are going to open it up to anybody who wants to come back and ask a second question. And we see that Mr. O'Reilly's hand is raised, but anybody who does want to come back and ask a follow-up question is welcome to do so. And we will call on Mr. O'Reilly now.
Okay, thank you. I'm still James O'Reilly. I still live at 50 Independence Way. I haven't moved in the meantime.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes, right. I thought I didn't want to confuse anybody. Does anybody, Stockman is 22 feet wide, right? Was it 24, 22? What was it?
24.
And does anybody know that the what was it called? The Honeywell Lab entrance road, how wide that is?
You're talking about the service road, the secondary entrance?
Service road, yeah, the one that led to the lab, which is no longer there.
I don't know, but I would guess it's in that 22 to 24 foot range.
Oh, okay, just that I recall during the whole Honeywell property zoning and ordinance and zoning, that it was said that they wanted to keep Stockman and the other roads, Stockton and other roads through the site relatively narrow. I know 2 cars can pass there, but relatively narrow so that they wouldn't be used as a cut through. So I'm wondering if Stockton would be wide enough to serve the needs of the proposed development.
So the entire roadway network was designed to handle the residential and the 900,000 square feet of office space. So it's designed to handle, significantly more traffic than the proposed use at this point.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anybody else who has a follow-up question?
Mr. Srithahan.
Mr. Sherlihan?
Mm-hmm.
I'll just go by Sri. Are you there, sir? That was the resident from 16 Gates, correct?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, Sri is great. Call me that. So whatever, I know that there was a response about not considering the tax revenues that would come or the comparative tax revenues with the other proposal and all other plan, what could have been and all that kind of stuff. But all said and done, Will this be significant enough for us to see a reduction in our rates?
In terms of your taxes?
Yeah.
It's very hard to say, but one thing that I always say is that, Morris Township taxes are one of the lowest in the area for good reason. That's because we have a very healthy balance between residential tax base and our commercial tax base. So when we do have commercial development, good commercial development, I will add, it takes the pressure off the residential tax rate. So the tax rate that the commercial side pays also goes to the school district. They pay, correct? They pay their fair share.
Yeah, they're entitled, same as the residential.
Right. So
60% of that.
Right. So the 60% of the revenue from a commercial site goes to the school district, just like 60% of the revenue from the residential site goes to the school district. So when you have a good commercial development come in, it does take the pressure, like I said, off the residential tax rate. Specific impact, I can't say right now until the assessment is done. But
it helps stabilize.
It helps stabilize, for sure, it helps stabilize the residential tax rate, which is why we've had, pre-COVID, we had, 4 years of flat tax this year in Morris Township with 1 year of a reduction. This year taxes went up because of the revenue shortfalls due to COVID. But we've managed our money well, and one reason we've been able to do that is because of our healthy commercial tax base.
Okay, but nothing has been taken as a budget credit in the forthcoming years.
We're not permitted.
No, we're not allowed. We're not allowed to do that. We are getting minimal tax revenue right now for vacant land. When you get your assessment, it's always the land value plus the improvement value on the land. And we're getting no improvement value whatsoever. It's just the vacant land value right now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Connor.
See a Douglas Ron.
Oh, sorry.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Can you spell your last name for the record?
Sure. It's Ron, R-A-H-N, 10 Featherly Road.
Good evening.
Good evening. What is the point to have the no variance shall be required in the ordinance?
Mr. Phillips?
I'm not sure which section the gentleman's referring to.
I'm not sure, but there was someone else who asked a question earlier on, and then got into talking about would we be behind the 8 ball, et cetera. But the question was not answered as to why is that statement even part of the ordinance that no variances shall be required.
It's not part of the ordinance. It's not part of the ordinance.
Okay.
I think it was a discussion about what happens if somebody wants to, or if the applicant wants to go beyond what's within the outline of the ordinance. Only then would a variance be required. But the statement of no variance is required if they meet the meets and bounds of what's outlined here in what we are discussing tonight, then no variances will be required.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. O'Connor.
Peter, you're very good at this. Who's next up, Mr. Slate?
Mr. Slate, do it.
I was going to go to Brian Morgan.
Brian Morgan. Mr. Morgan, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Good evening. Your name and address for the record?
Sure thing. 24 Green Knolls Road, and Brian Morgan. You can hear me okay? All right. So,
yes, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, so I'm no expert, but I heard it mentioned before, and I latched onto it, right? I heard the statement, something to the lines of good planning comes through zoning, not through adjustment. And so, again, we in our neighborhood, we were, again, not really happy with that CubeSmart that popped up. And so I'm just a little sensitive to that. So I was bringing up the zoning map. And since this is a zoning discussion, I just felt a little concerned about what is allowed and how easily those variances are made. And are the ordinances in this area correct, right? So the reason why I bring it up is that CubeSmart, as was mentioned before, is on an OL 40 when it's on at most a 5-acre lot of property. That just seems what little I know of an OL 40 is that it requires 40 acres. So again, I'm no expert, and I recognize this might be a little bit beyond the remit of this meeting, but since we're talking about zoning and what will be allowed to variances, I think that's where it becomes relevant. Not only that is our neighborhood is also in a RA 35 when neighborhoods right next to us are RA 15, which I think requires a lot more ornery applications to get even a shed built. So I'm just wondering if there's any thought to what review is done to make sure that these zonings are just make sense. And if there's a zone that's just not correct, something seems as blatantly incorrect as having a 5-acre zone labeled as a 40-acre zone, how does that get corrected? Or how is that allowed continually?
Mr. Phillips?
So, and Jim, you can kind of help refresh my memory on this, but you're correct that if you just look at independently the lot that was part of the CubeSmart application, that certainly didn't meet the minimum 40-acre lot size requirement in order to basically go forward with OL 40 development. So you would think on its face, maybe that wasn't the appropriate zoning. And I know that's something we shouldn't debate here, but my recollection is that possibly the reason that was zoned that way is that lot was owned by Honeywell, and it was probably viewed as being potentially part of a larger lot merger. I mean, beyond that, I don't know the history. And again, as many and others have said this evening, any owner of property has the right at any time to attempt to make a case for a variance, given whatever they feel is the special circumstances affecting their lot. And clearly that was what was done with regard to CubeSmart. And that was in part, and again, I'm going back to my recollection, done because of the fact that was sort of a severed lot that didn't meet the OL 40 requirements. Do I have that right, Jim?
Yeah, I'm not sure if Honeywell ever owned it, but there was a single family home and a barn. It was almost like a farm type setup that was there prior. But I would go to add, one step further that the planning board, does at times look at the zoning throughout the township, and if they see parcels that are not, that maybe that zone doesn't make sense, that there is a review of that, just to kind of answer another portion of your question.
Great. So just to clarify that last part, Mr. Slate, so you're saying that is routinely, is that part of like a master plan, or is there just a routine zoning board meeting, or how would that even happen?
No, I would say that's part of the master plan process.
It is.
It occurs every 10 years.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That was my question. Appreciate the answer.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Connor?
Mr. O'Connor.
Yes, as a follow-up question to something Mr. Phillips had referred to earlier on regarding the zoning change. I to assume that all of the land that is owned by or would be owned by the developer, if everything goes forward, would also include the undeveloped areas in which he would have taken possession of. I'm referring specifically to the northeast boundaries of the property on Columbia Road. There's a good part of that property is not on his preliminary site plan, but the zoning would encompass all of the land that he would be purchasing. Is that correct?
That is correct. The zoning would encompass the entire 81 acres, which stretches as far down to include a significant amount of the frontage along Columbia Road. And one of the things that I might add that we're retaining in the zoning is that large setback from Columbia Road. We're maintaining the 450-foot building setback as part of this proposed zoning.
The area that of his property that is divided by Stockton and not part of the area owned by the residents, but the area just to the north of it. There was a future developmental plan on his initial proposal or plan that he had circulated that they might consider developing in the future. My question is, if the zoning on the north side of Stockton down to Columbia is changed, if the zoning is changed to be consistent with the zoning throughout his developmental site, what requirements would he have to meet in order to expand and build additional fields, parking, or other facilities consistent with his usage? Would he have to get from the township in order to proceed? Since he does have the zoning right, but this approval that he eventually would get for development would not have any authorization for him to develop the area that we just referenced to that is not planned to be developed at this time, but could be.
So if the zoning is adopted, there is what I'll characterize as a zoning envelope, which is all of the setback requirements for buildings, parking areas, outdoor fields. All that would have to be taken into account in laying out what can or can't be done on, I think, what you refer to as that northerly portion of the tract. If a developer wanted to go beyond that zoning envelope and basically breach the requirements in the ordinance, he'd have to apply for a bulk variance in order to do that.
Well, would he have an as of right, though, to develop the property on the northeast side of Stockton, which had the usage zone consistent with the rest of his development? How much limitations will have been placed upon him if that portion of the site is not developed at this particular time?
It's based on the zoning envelope. You've got to apply those distances and setbacks and apply that envelope physically on the property to see where you can and can't go in terms of development without seeking a variance. You actually have to do that exercise. And again, for just by way of example, there's a 450-foot minimum building setback to Columbia Road. If the applicant wanted to build within that 450 feet a building, he could not do that without seeking variance relief from the planning board.
Do you know the area that I'm referring to along Stockton, which he identified as future youth developmental area?
Yeah, yes, I know that. And some portion of that land that is north of Stockton Road is within an area that could accept some development based on the zoning standards that are part of this ordinance. But to see exactly where that occurs and what the limits are, you have to basically apply the zoning envelope to the site, lay it out, and see where you can or can't meet the standards and where you'd have to provide certain setbacks and buffers depending on if you're proposing a field or a building or what have you.
So if I could.
Would he have to go back to the planning board for approval to expand if he stays within the limitations which you placed on him?
He has to go to the planning board for site plan approval, whether he's seeking a variance or not.
Okay, so then he doesn't have an absolute right to develop the property outside the area, but he could easily just present an expansion of the plan to the planning board, and as long as he meets the limitations of the envelope which you made reference to, he could proceed. Is that, or he could be assumed that he'll get approval?
Well, if I could jump in, I don't think there should be any assumptions. If there is you call it an expansion, but You can look at this as possibly a phased development. You know, you can, the future possibilities are later phases. But if those phases are not part of the initial application to the planning board, then any additional building that might occur within the approved envelope would then again need to go back to the planning board and go through the whole parts of the process, maybe not the whole process again, but example, if that future area that you're referring to has a parking lot. And if they want to add a parking lot, they're going to have to do another traffic study. All right, so it all depends on what is going to be seen at the planning board at the initial stage versus what they might hold back for future development. But anything that's not part of that original planning board application will then, if they want to expand to do a second phase within the envelope, we'll have to go back to the planning board again and go through the entire planning board process once again with expert testimony, full hearings, public participation, and the such. So there's nothing as of right just because it says that it's future development. It's all based on what goes to the planning board at a site plan hearing. Would you agree with what I just said, Mr. Slate?
Yes.
Does that answer your question, Mr. O'Connor?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Not seeing anybody else, sir.
So I don't see any more, hands raised.
So I'll make a last call for any members of the public.
There's one.
Oh, somebody is there one popping up?
There was, then they went down.
Up and down.
So I see a ASK, is it RX? I need glasses at Verizon.net raised hand.
Yes, she is.
ASK at Verizon.net.
Right.
Good evening. Could you hear me?
Well, try it again. Nope, we can't hear you now. We're still not hearing anything.
Hello?
Yes?
Can you hear me now?
Barely.
Barely, we can barely hear you.
Okay. This is Andrew Kessler, 11 Wolf Road, Morris Township. I'm in Columbia Park.
Can't hear him.
Good. Say your name and address once again.
Andrew Kessler, 11 Wolf Road, Morris Township in Columbia Park.
I couldn't understand the address. Could anybody else understand the address? I just heard the 11.
I think he's saying Wolf Road.
Yes, correct.
Okay. We'll attempt to hear your question. Go ahead, sir. And speak slowly
if I can just suggest that you speak slowly like this, I think we'll get through this.
Okay, I have a question regarding Prescott. Is everyone familiar on the board with the curve going up and down from Prescott and the width of the road?
Sir, can I suggest that you step back from your microphone a little bit? Perhaps if you move the microphone away from your mouth, it might be clearer.
Could you hear me better now?
Yes, that is better.
Okay. I have a question regarding Prescott. If everyone on the board is familiar with the curve that goes up, it's very dangerous blind spot area.
Wow. I think he's got two devices on. One's distorting the other.
We lost you there. Is it Mr. Tesler?
Mr. Kessler, are you on a
Kessler.
phone or is it a computer? I don't know if there's another device we're getting feedback in the background, or if you move further away from it. Let's try that.
If you can move further away from your microphone and then speak louder, let's try that.
Okay, how's that?
No.
Not much better.
It's extremely garbled.
Do you have a phone that you could dial into the meeting with?
Yes, I do. Give me a second if you want to take somebody else.
That's a little bit clearer.
I think that was the device in the background, sir.
Try doing what you just did and speak to your question.
Could you hear me better now?
A little bit, yes.
Speak up.
You have to speak up, yep.
Yes, my question is regarding Prescott Road. The width, and if everyone on the board is familiar with the dangerous curve, it's almost a blind spot area, an accident waiting to happen, and it's actually also a cut through. So the added traffic from the Red Bulls, the community, and the cut through, was that taken into consideration as well, that curve, and if anyone's familiar with what I'm speaking of?
So I heard you're talking about a dangerous curve on Prescott Road. Are you talking as you head towards the railroad tracks, you know, where the fence exists and people walk in the roadway?
No. Coming from Park Avenue into the development.
Coming up the hill?
So coming up the hill from Park Avenue.
Exactly. That hill, myself, many other homeowners, you know,
It's really.
it's not wide enough for two cars. Now, if we're going to have a lot of traffic or trucks coming,
It would be.
it's a fear of accidents waiting to happen.
In the homeowner association.
Yeah, so it sounds to me that anything related to traffic and traffic safety, again, is a site plan issue. If there are issues relating to increased traffic in dangerous areas, the planning board would take that into consideration. I do remind you, if you think that there's a dangerous situation on the existing roadway, existing right now, you should take that to the homeowners association and the property owners association to possibly address it. Hold on one second.
Just Mayor, also that I'm aware that the homeowners association is working with our police department to address some of the concerns such as cut through traffic, you know, those kinds of things. They are private roads, but there has open dialogue has begun between representatives from the HOA and our police department, primarily dealing with Prescott Road.
They brought up earlier the suggestion to go out to see that other field with the lights. Are the board members familiar with this curve that I'm speaking of on Prescott?
Yes.
I'm very familiar with it, and I'm not aware of, you know, a problem with that.
And my understanding, could somebody explain how dorms fit in the master plan? To me, that is residential use.
This is the beginning of that question, something about residential use in the master plan?
On the Red Bulls plan, they're building dorms, housing. So how does that fall into this master plan, and how does that fall into this is supposed to be commercial use and not residential use?
So your question is, if this is not a residential use, how is a dorm allowed?
Correct.
Paul, do you want to?
I think within the umbrella of athletic training facilities use, we've included provision for dormitories. Beyond that, in terms of the extent, the location, the number of occupants, that all is, again, something that would be addressed at the time of a particular site plan application. So it's basically subsumed and anticipated within the zoning that it would be permitted if this zone change were to go into effect. So that addresses it because it's contemplated in the zoning text within, again, the term athletic training facilities use.
Is anyone familiar with the Jensen Florin Park? Do they have dorms there? That's an athletic training facility.
Yes, but every town has their own zones. There's no zone for athletic training facility that's a state level zone. So every municipality has their own zoning regulations, and they frequently differ.
And another question, it seems like a lot of board members' minds are made up already. And some people are very open to suggestions, even in the opening statement, how wonderful this all is. You know, you do have to take into consideration some changes. We're going to be good neighbors with the Red Bulls, but there's a two-way street. We have to work it out so it's good for the town, good for the homeowners, good for everyone, but it seems like it's a one-way street. Everyone's mentioning that Stockton will be the access. Why is everyone speaking, why cannot they use the service road? Make that the entrance and the exit, and that solves a lot of the issues of our homeowners and our community.
So that was addressed earlier this evening, the fact that we spoke about the fact that those site plan details will be discussed at the planning board, that the planning board does have rights to determine appropriate traffic flow. And if the planning board determines that more traffic should be flowing on the service road versus the main entrance, they will work with the applicant to make sure that that happens.
But I want to make the ordinance, I thought somebody had mentioned earlier, was stating Stockton. And I remember on the last meeting we spoke, one of the members asked if you could take the verbiage out Stockton.
Personally, I don't think that verbiage means much when it gets to the planning board.
I don't want to say means much. We want to make certain that, you know, like we're not behind the eight ball again. You just said something, it doesn't mean much. So it's a iffy area. So why can't that verbiage be taken out? So then there is the opportunity to have the traffic flow in and out from the service area. The Red Bulls do have the finances to make it work for them. It's beneficial for the homeowners. You talk about safety. A lot of people have children in the community. They walk their dogs. We walk throughout the community. That will solve all the issues, having that as the main, instead of Honeywell Service Road, Red Bulls Road, Red Bulls Way. That could be their in and out, and that solves a lot of the traffic and a lot of the danger and a lot of the hazard within the community.
But I would mention that intersection of Stockton and Columbia, you know, was designed to handle that traffic, whereas the service road was not. But that's, as the mayor mentioned, you know, that is something that can be looked at further with the planning board at the site plan process.
So if they were able to design that, why can't the service road be designed to do that as well?
If the planning board determines that the service road should be widened to accommodate greater traffic flow, I can't make promises, but I would venture to say that would happen. If that's what the planning board deems is necessary for traffic flow.
Stockton still in?
Stockton is always going to be part of the mix, sir. It is a road that's part of the property. As I stated earlier, it's underlying to what the property owners own. Stockton Road is on the lands that we're talking about. You can't restrict them from not using their own road. But what the planning board will do is try to accommodate the best traffic flow for the facility and take into account the consideration of the residents, as I stated earlier. That's part of their job, is to consider what impacts there are on surrounding residents in every single application.
Could be added, Stockton and the Honeywell Service Road for access. So there's an option.
There is an option. There are two existing roadways. And the planning board will determine what the best traffic flow will be based on testimony that's going to occur at that meeting. I understand your concern. I think we all understand everybody's concern about traffic flow through the site and what traffic might be brought.
This whole process will be much smoother for everybody if that's made their entrance and their exit, because they have an area on the site, if you're familiar with, a bus area, drop off. They're going to have buses coming out of Stockton, dropping off for tournaments.
Yes. Yeah. Again, again, those things will be addressed. I will be addressed by the planning board. Mr. Phillips, I have a question for you. The ordinance that's before us tonight encompasses both the underlying office zone as well as the Red Bulls overlay zone, correct? I want to call it a Red Bulls overlay zone. The overlay zone that's designed to accommodate a sports training facility. So it encompasses both, correct?
Correct. Basically, the underlying office lab zoning is staying in place as one alternative for the 81 acres, and now we're adding athletic training facilities use as a second alternative.
As a second. So I again go back to my opening statement where there is an as of right ability for the office park to be built. And that office park has an as of right to use the existing roadway that comes off of Columbia as it did previously. And so we can't restrict ourselves in this ordinance to possibly disallow or discourage use of that main entrance should an office building eventually be built there. So that's why that language is there. It was the primary access point for the office complex when it did exist. And it's an as of right, and correct me if I'm wrong, any of my professionals, it's as of right for them to use it as an office building.
Are the Red Bulls. We're not talking about offices that would have, should have, could have.
We are talking about just a zone change tonight, sir. Just a zone change. We are not talking about a specific application. That specific application will come before the planning board. This is just meets and bounds for a zone change.
Mayor, just a point of information so we're accurate. If you look at the ordinance before us, the development standards 7A for the non-residential overlay district say primary access shall be from Columbia Road as part of the office standards, but on the athletic facilities, there is that extra phrase via Stockton Drive. So there's, in the current existing language, a difference between what's specified for the office overlay and the athletic training facilities overlay, just as a point of information.
And I would just say that when, the development was originally considered, Stockton Drive was not named, and now, we have the road, the main entrance is Stockton Drive, so that would be, an access point.
Mm-hmm.
And I would concur with Jim on that.
So it's a matter of history.
Okay.
It did not exist, Jim, back in 2012 and 2015.
But for the office complex, the original zone, the primary access was contemplated to be what is now called Stockton.
Absolutely correct.
So I encourage everybody to let the planning board do their job in approving an appropriate site plan. But really, again, we are just talking about the meets and bounds of a zone tonight, just the zone, and all the details and specifics of what is going to be proposed, and we are not exactly sure what exactly will be proposed until it gets to the site plan process. And then we will have very lengthy discussions, I have no doubt, before the planning board about what's appropriate, what the impacts are on the community, and there will be ample opportunity for everybody from the public to weigh in at the planning board process. And the planning board members, I'm sure, will do their job in approving something that's appropriate for the site.
Mayor, can I make one other comment on the planning board proceedings, should they happen? As a member of the planning board, our decisions are made strictly based on the testimony and the evidence that comes before the planning board as part of the public hearing. So it's very important for members of the public to attend and to speak up and to share their views on particular points, because then that does become part of the record, part of the hearing, and that's how the views of the public are incorporated into the decisions that are made by the planning board at the site plan level.
I see Fred Antelek has his hand raised again.
Yeah, Frank Antelek from 3 Featherly Road.
Ed?
Hello.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I had 2 things. In regards to the service road, it could open a can of worms for our neighborhood because that butts up to our neighborhood. But that's to be determined later. I had a tax question that I don't know if it's appropriate, but to ask. But my question is there a tax break involved for the Bulls in the transaction?
Stated in my opening remarks that they have not requested a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes, which is a normal way of giving a developer a tax break. So no, they are fully funding the project and will pay full value taxes to the community, including the school district.
Okay, thanks. I was just curious.
And did you have the second question?
No, the service road.
Oh, the service road. We got that.
Lee Goldberg has his hand raised again.
Mr. Goldberg?
Yeah, hi, Lee Goldberg, 10 Arrowhead Road. Just to follow up on Mr. Kessler's comments regarding Stockton Road and some other concerns raised by the public, and just my recollection from the master plan consistency review meeting that was held earlier this week. I believe the planning board member, Mr. Quillen, had expressed the interest in probing, perhaps removing the reference to Stockton in the amendment, and or I'm confused whether it was in the amendment or in the ordinance, but I recall maybe it was Mr. Warner saying that Mr. Carlson would perhaps be able to weigh in on whether the removal of the word Stockton would result in a substantive change to the amendment or the intention of it. And there was some question there. And then based on Mayor Graysel's comments earlier, where, saying that, that doesn't seem to, not much there, or it doesn't mean much. So has Mr. Carlson done that review, or was there any follow-up to sort of probe, exploring removing that to sort of lift this sort of main contention point between residents and the proposed use?
He'll find it would be a substantial change.
So, Mr. Carlson, would you like to weigh in? I believe that we were concerned that it might be considered a substantive change.
Sure, Mayor.
Yes.
I'm glad to weigh in, and this is sort of a bit of a gray area. It very well might be a material change that would require to go back to first reading. It's unclear to me, and I this was only brought to my attention today, so I've only had a short while to look this over. But it does seem to me that this could, possibly impact the development proposal in a somewhat meaningful way. Even though I could also see that it could not have an impact on it, and I could go back and forth on those two things. I would need a little while to opine on that. But as I sit here, I think I would say that it should go back to first reading if that's considered. But I'm gonna go off camera now and take yet another look at this, which I did this afternoon as well.
But Mr. Goldberg, let me, I sit on the planning board as well as Ms. Wilson, and there was a short discussion about that wording. That was just one person's opinion. I don't think anybody else on the planning board really opined on whether they felt that was substantive, would help in terms of changing the ordinance in any significant way. My personal opinion is, as I stated, the planning board has as part of their job to determine the appropriate traffic flow through the site, and they are going to work to ameliorate the impacts on the residents. And so whether it says via Stockton Drive or doesn't say via Stockton Drive, the planning board is going to do their job to ensure that there's the proper traffic flow with minimal impacts to residents. So it's my opinion that those words don't mean much. All they do is identify the main access road to the site. And that's, for me, that's all that those words do. And the planning board still has full sway as to determine what best flow of traffic is. Would you agree, Mr. Phillips?
Yeah, and I think that at least from what we know about the site conditions today, the prior approvals, the improvements that were made, I think I speak for Jim Slate as well, that I think your professionals believe that the way the wording exists now is proper. And as you say, Mr. Mayor, there may be additional information that comes up at the time of the site plan approval, and this will all be discussed and deliberated by the board, the applicant, and the public. But I think for purposes of providing a framework going forward, based on what we know now, I think the language should stay as is.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Mr. Goldberg, do you have anything further? Did that answer your question?
I don't have anything further. It somewhat answered my question. I guess the confusion that remains in my mind is whether or not, as Mr. Carlson looks at this and opines on this further, whether his determination of whether it would or would not be a substantive change, I would like to be known before, proceeding on and memorializing all of this. And if there was a way to remove the language to alleviate any concerns that may or may not, or that may exist there, that do exist in the public, that would go a long way to helping things go, more seamlessly in the future, to just sort of take that off the table if that's something that was possible. But again, maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but
yeah, I'm not sure what exactly it's taking off the table by changing the language in my mind, which is what I said, that the planning board still has full control over traffic flow eventually.
yeah, I mean, again, Mr. Carlson had mentioned that he needs to sort of look at it a little closer. I don't know if whatever he determines in looking at it closer would change any result or any wording or any language. If it does, and it seems to be an enlightened approach, that's great. If not, that's fine also. Just was curious based on the discussions that took place the other evening from one of the planning board members, and it presenting to me as a potential impediment, removing an impediment from the residents and the public's view of the proposed use in the future. But thank you for your time.
Mr. Goldberg, thank you. Looking at it again right now and having looked at it quickly this afternoon,
Mr. Carlson, let me interrupt you for a second. I don't want you to come to a snap judgment. We are at 10:12 already this evening. We're coming to the close of the meeting. I would just suggest that perhaps you take a deeper dive into this over the next few days. We're going to be back here December 8th. We can discuss this further at that time. But I don't want you to make a snap judgment right now. I prefer you to take a more thoughtful approach into what your answer might be.
Glad to do it, Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
I see Alfred DeMiro. I'm pronouncing that right. Has raised his hand again.
Mr. DeMiro?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, sir.
Yeah, just very briefly, speaking for myself, whose home is actually on Stockton, although I had the Aldrich address, I think it would give a certain level of comfort to myself and others in my neighborhood if the words via Stockton Drive in that 7BP, just remove those words. You could say primary access shall be from Columbia Road. You're not eliminating Stockton, but you're leveling the playing field for us and giving us a certain level of comfort. I have a real problem with the wording the way it is now, because you have mandatory language, shall, and then it has my street on it. So it says it shall be from Columbia Road via Stockton. And I hear all the arguments that we can go in front of the planning board and make our arguments there. But I think we all would have a greater comfort level if you remove from the ordinance the word via Stockton Drive. I don't think that changes it materially at all, because you're still talking about access from Columbia. You're not saying it shall not be from Stockton, but you're just leveling the playing field. And that's what I wanted to say. I respectfully submit that to your council.
That was very nicely stated, Mr. DeMero. Yes, Ms. Wilson, go ahead.
Yes, I just would like to ask Mr. Phillips to comment on how, from his perspective, how, if at all, the meaning of that would be changed if the via Stockton Drive were eliminated.
So again, before Mr. Phillips, before you reply, we are getting close to the end of the meeting. I don't want to anybody make any snap judgments on this issue, which appears to be a little emotional. And I want everybody to have a thoughtful response. So if you do want to go forward, Mr. Phillips, you can. But if you want to prefer to wait until our meeting next week to reply to that, I'm happy with that as well.
Well, I think I've kind of made myself clear in terms of, what my position is as a professional and why. And, I don't, I can think about it until the next meeting, but again, from the standpoint of your professionals, we had the language in there for a reason, but that's all I'm going to say. I have nothing in addition to say at this point.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anybody else with their hand raised?
No, sir.
Okay. So does anybody from the Township Committee have any questions based on what residents have raised?
You want to do a motion to close?
Well, given the hour, I'm not sure I want to close the public portion. Just maybe start off the next meeting with people who might have missed tonight's meeting. I know we had wanted to close the public portion before the Red Bull spoke, but I don't think that there's enough time tonight to make. Do you know how long the Red Bulls might want?
Less than 5 minutes, sir.
Less than 5 minutes. Is there a consensus from the Township Committee whether we should let the Red Bulls make their statement now or save it for the beginning of next meeting?
If they make their statement now, does that preclude further public comment on the next meeting?
Yeah, just as we had done with the restoration hardware proceedings, where the applicant did make a statement to the board, there were no public comments after that because we don't want to open up. This is a zoning hearing. It's not a hearing based on anything the Red Bulls say, and so we didn't want to open up questions to any Red Bull statement or comments back on it.
Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor,
I am not in favor of it.
You're not in favor.
Mr. Mayor, I'm in favor of having letting the Red Bulls wait.
Mr. Ravitz, one at a time, please. Please let Ms. Wilson finish what she was going to say. Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Wilson.
Thank you. If in that case, I am not in favor of having the Red Bulls make their statement now, because I do believe that we need additional time for public comment on the 8th. I know myself, I've had a few people tell me they were unable to attend tonight due to conflicts. It is a busy time of year, and I am in favor of continuing to have available for anyone who chooses the opportunity to speak on December 8th.
Mr. Mayor, may I?
Yes, Mr. Mancuso, go ahead, and then we'll go to Mr. Ravitz.
We had 100 people here at the height of the public participation. We're down to about 50 now. I think it would be improper to hear the Red Bulls now until we had the rest of those people back. I just think we have a better opportunity to hear and see what they have to say.
That's an excellent point, Mr. Mancuso, that some people do go to bed at 10 o'clock. My wife goes to bed at 9. My wife goes to bed at 9:30, and point well taken, Mr. Mancuso. Thank you. Mr. Ravitz.
I just want to state that I am in complete agreement with Ms. Wilson and Mr. Mancuso that the Red Bulls should wait till the end of the public commentary. I think that there's more people that probably do want to speak. I don't know if it's going to take till 10:30 on the 8th, but we do want to allow people additional time if they think of other questions that they want to ask to our professionals.
Okay, Mr. Jorphy, your opinion.
I would concur, Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Mancuso, I think your words of wisdom were most appropriate. This application is way too important to our community for so many people to miss what the Red Bulls have to say. So I am going to agree with everybody else. And we will just adjourn at this point, and we will open the next meeting with a continuation of public comments. I don't think that will take very long, given that there were no more hands tonight, but we'll leave it open. And after that, we will turn to the Red Bulls, and then we'll begin our deliberations. If we go to 10th, start at 7 on the 8th and go to 10:30, there's a good chance we'll take a vote on the 8th. But let's keep it open. Okay, so with that said, we will adjourn for this evening, come back on the 8th. Does anybody have any closing comments before we adjourn from the Township Committee?
Just real quickly, Mr. Ravitz, I just want to thank the members of the community for their thoughtful comments. Every comment has been heard, and we will take all comments into consideration that have to do with the zoning. Things with the planning board are out of our purview, but thank you for stepping up and speaking your mind.
Mm-hmm. I have one more point, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, sir.
I agree with Mr. Ravitz wholeheartedly. I think the questions were well thought out and asked properly, but I would say that our two experts, Jim Slate and Paul Phillips, did one heck of a job here tonight. They had the answers to everything. And I think everybody on the dais, et cetera, did a very, very good job. So my congratulations to you both.
Thank you, Mr. Mancuso. Anybody else? So I will echo what Mr. Mancuso just said. Let the residents know that this governing body has full confidence in our professionals. We have excellent professionals in this town that give great advice, and they did a wonderful job tonight. Also, to echo what's been said, that we appreciate the public participation. This governing body believes in public participation. We listen and we hear, and we appreciate everybody's comments. I remind everybody that 2 members of the governing body do sit on the planning board. So there's, the letter. I always say that there's letter of law and there's spirit of law. And the discussions tonight, whatever comes out, whatever happens at the end of the day, the spirit of the discussions tonight will be taken by those 2 members of the governing body that sit on the planning board, and they will take the spirit of the discussion tonight to that board as they deliberate further down in the process. But thank you, everybody, again, for coming out. We will adjourn until December 8th at 7 p.m. and we will open it up again for public commentary at that point. And we look forward to hearing from the Red Bulls after the public commentary is closed. So will somebody now move for adjournment of the meeting?
I move we adjourn, Mr. Mayor.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming out, and we'll see you back here on December 8th.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.